Before this story begins, let me ask you something. What if the truth you were waiting for was hidden in a letter that was never opened? Tonight's Dark Pulse story isn't about a single crime, it's about silence. About secrets buried so deep, they were meant to stay forgotten. You're about to hear a true-feeling crime thriller where every lie has a cost, every decision leaves a scar, and every secret waits patiently. So make sure your lights are low, your headphones are on, and distractions are gone. Because once this story starts, you're listening to Dark Pulse, where crime, suspense, and hidden truths collide. The Unopened Letter, a small town, a brutal crime, and a letter that was never opened. The town of Ashwood, Oregon slept early. It always had. Tree-lined streets went quiet after 9. Porch lights glowed like tired eyes. The river hummed somewhere beyond the houses, steady and indifferent, as if it had seen everything before and learned not to care. People here trusted silence. They trusted routine. They trusted that nothing truly bad could happen in a place this small. That belief died on a cold October night. The call came in at 2:14 a.m. Sheriff Evan Cole was already awake. He often was. Sleep had become something fragile since his wife died 3 years earlier. He lay still on his bed staring at the ceiling when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. One look at the screen and he knew. Calls at that hour were never good. He answered without speaking. "Sheriff, we've got a body." The dispatcher's voice was tight, controlled, too controlled. Evan sat up slowly. "Where?" "Redwood Trail, near the old mail depot." That made his chest tighten. The mail depot hadn't been used in over a decade, a forgotten concrete building swallowed by trees and weeds. Kids used to dare each other to sneak in there. Parents warned them away. "I'm on my way," Evan said. He ended the call and stayed still for a second, longer than necessary. Some instinct told him this wasn't just another case. The crime scene lights cut through the darkness like knives. Red and blue reflections danced across wet leaves and tree trunks. The smell of damp earth mixed with something metallic. Something Evan recognized far too well. Blood. Deputy Mara Lewis stood near the trail, arms crossed tight against the cold. She'd grown up in Ashwood. Everyone knew her. She looked pale now, her eyes fixed somewhere beyond the flashing lights. "You okay?" Evan asked quietly. She nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "She was found by a jogger," Mara said. "Early 40s, female, no ID on her." She hesitated. "And there's something else." Evan followed her gaze. Near the victim's hand, half sunk into the mud, lay an old paper envelope. Brown, weathered, the edges soft with age. It didn't belong there. Evan crouched beside it but didn't touch it. "What is that?" "No idea," Mara said. "Crime scene says it hasn't been opened." The envelope looked deliberate, not dropped, placed. Evan stood and moved closer to the body. The woman lay on her side, eyes open, staring into nothing. Dried blood darkened her hair. There were marks on her wrists, not deep, not sloppy, careful, intentional. "This wasn't random," Evan murmured. Mara swallowed. "None of it feels random." The medical examiner arrived shortly after. The body was taken away. Evidence was bagged. Photos were snapped. But the envelope remained. Everyone seemed hesitant around it, like it carried a quiet warning. Evan finally nodded to the tech. "Bag it." When the envelope slid into plastic, something about it felt heavier than it should have been. By sunrise, the news spread. Ashwood woke up to sirens, whispers, and fear. At Maple Street Diner, people gathered over burnt coffee and half-eaten eggs, pretending not to listen while doing exactly that. "Did you hear?" someone whispered. "They found her near the depot." I told you that place was cursed. Who was she? No one knows. Fear moves fast in small towns. Truth doesn't. By mid-morning, the victim was identified. Rachel Miller, local, lived 2 streets over from Evan, worked at the county records office. Quiet, divorced, no kids, no known enemies. Evan stared at her file in his office, the photo clipped to the corner. She was smiling in it, the kind of polite smile people practiced. You knew her? Mara asked. Evan nodded slowly. Everyone knew her. That was the problem. Later that afternoon, Evan stood alone in the evidence room. The envelope lay on the metal table between him and the silence. No return address, no stamp, just a name written in faded ink. Rachel Miller. Evan put on gloves and lifted it carefully. The seal was intact. It had never been opened. He hesitated. There was no logical reason to feel uneasy. And yet, something about opening it felt wrong, like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He set it back down. Not yet, he muttered to himself. That night, Evan went home to a house that echoed too much. He poured a drink he didn't need and sat in the dark. The envelope followed him in his thoughts. Why had it been there? Why now? And why unopened? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Some letters are meant to stay closed. Evan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He typed back immediately. Who is this? The reply came too fast. You'll understand soon. He stared at the screen, pulse racing. Someone knew. Someone was watching. The next morning, another crime surfaced. Not a murder, but close enough to shake the town even harder. A break-in at the old elementary school. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged. Except one thing. In the principal's abandoned office, someone had left an envelope on the desk. Same color, same age, same careful placement. This one had a name, too. Evan Cole. Mara stood beside him, jaw tight. This isn't coincidence anymore. Evan didn't respond. His thoughts were already racing ahead, connecting dots that didn't want to connect. He picked up the envelope. The weight was familiar. Too familiar. You want to open it? Mara asked quietly. Evan looked at her, then at the envelope, then back at her. Not yet, he said again. That night, Ashwood locked its doors. Parents pulled kids close. Lights stayed on longer. And somewhere, unseen, someone waited. Because the letter wasn't just a message, it was a warning. And the truth it carried was already moving. Slow, patient, unstoppable. Evan didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch, the house dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight outside. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. The refrigerator hum, the ticking clock, the wind brushing against the windows. His phone rested on his chest. Silent, too silent. By morning, Ashwood felt different. Not louder, not chaotic, just tense. Like the town itself was holding its breath. At the station, Evan found Mara already there, scrolling through reports with a tight expression. Nothing new from forensics, she said before he could ask. Time of death still between midnight and 1. No defensive wounds. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. And the envelopes? Evan asked. Mara exhaled slowly. Paper dates back at least 15 years. Ink, too. No fingerprints, no DNA. Whoever's doing this planned ahead. A long time ahead. That sat heavy between them. 15 years. Evan nodded and walked into his office. He shut the door and leaned against it for a moment, eyes closed. 15 years ago, Ashwood had been quieter, cleaner. Or at least that's what people like to believe. He sat down and opened Rachel Miller's personnel file again. County records clerk, access to archives, old documents, letters. That wasn't a coincidence. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Sheriff, Mara said. Stepping in. Rachel's sister is here. She wants to talk to you. Rachel Miller had kept her life small, but not small enough to be forgotten. Emily Miller sat stiffly in the interview room, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were red, but no tears fell. She looked angry more than anything else. She was scared, Emily said quietly. Evan leaned forward. Scared of what? Emily shook her head. She wouldn't say, just jumpy, always checking her phone, locking her doors. Did she mention anyone? Any threats? No, but... Emily hesitated. A few weeks ago, she asked me something weird. Evan waited. She asked if I remembered something from when we were kids. Something that happened in this town. I told her no. I honestly don't. What did she say after that? Emily swallowed. She said maybe it was better that way. The room fell quiet. After Emily left, Evan sat staring at the one-way mirror. Memory. That word kept circling back. Later that day, Evan drove to the county records building. Rachel's office was exactly as she'd left it. Neatly stacked folders, a mug with a faded logo, a desk drawer that still smelled faintly of lavender. He pulled the drawer open. Inside were personal notes. Sticky reminders, a folded piece of paper with a list of dates written in careful handwriting, all from 15 years ago. Evan's chest tightened again. At the bottom of the drawer, taped to the back panel, was an envelope, identical to the others, still sealed. His fingers hovered over it. This one had no name, just a date. He left it untouched. On his way out, he noticed something else. Rachel's computer screen. The screensaver was on, cycling through family photos, then it paused. On a scanned image. A letter. Evan leaned closer. It was old, the same handwriting, and at the bottom, barely visible. If you're reading this, it's already too late. Evan shut the computer off. That evening, the second envelope addressed to him was tested. Empty. No letter inside. Just a faint smell of old paper and something else. Dust. Time. A message without words. His phone buzzed again after midnight. Same unknown number. You still haven't opened it. Evan typed back slower this time. Why Rachel? The reply took longer. Too long. She remembered. Evan's hands trembled. Remembered what? No response. The next morning, Ashwood found its third shock. A man named Thomas Hale, former high school teacher, was discovered unconscious in his home. Alive, barely. No forced entry, no theft. Just one thing missing. Every photograph from the year 2009. Evan stood in the man's living room, staring at bare walls where frames had once hung. He taught half this town, Mara said quietly. Retired early. Said it was health reasons. Evan said nothing, because his own memories were starting to itch. 2009. That year surfaced in his mind like a shape underwater, unclear but present. At the hospital, Thomas Hale slipped in and out of consciousness. When Evan leaned close, Thomas's eyes snapped open. Did you open it? He whispered. Evan froze. Open what? Thomas's fingers dug into the bed sheets. Don't, he said. If you open it, it starts again. What starts again? Evan demanded. Thomas shook his head violently, then fell back, monitors screaming. That night, Evan sat alone in his office. The envelope with his name on it lay open in front of him. Empty, mocking. He pulled out a dusty box from the back of a cabinet. Old case files, closed cases, cases no one liked to revisit. One folder stopped him cold. 2009, missing child unresolved. A boy named Lucas Reed, age 9, disappeared near the old mail depot, never found, case quietly buried. Evan's breath grew shallow. He remembered the search parties, the river, the silence afterward. And then he remembered something else. A letter. His phone vibrated again. You were there too. Evan stared at the message. A cold realization crept in. This wasn't just a killer playing games. This was someone reopening wounds, exposing choices, punishing silence. He stood and locked the evidence room door. Inside, the original unopened letter sat waiting. For the first time, Evan wasn't sure if opening it would bring answers, or destroy everything that was still holding this town together. Outside, Ashwood slept uneasily, because the past had finally found its voice, and it wasn't done speaking. The investigation begins as dark secrets of a quiet American town surface. Ashwood had stopped pretending. By the third day, fear wasn't whispered anymore. It sat openly on front porches and grocery store aisles, inside the tight smiles people gave each other while pretending everything was normal. It wasn't. Evan stood in the station hallway watching officers move back and forth. No one joked anymore. No one lingered. Every door closing sounded heavier than it should have. "My press is outside," Mara said, joining him. "Local news, Portland too." Evan nodded once. "Give them a statement. Nothing detailed. They're already asking about the letters." His jaw tightened. "Say we're following leads, that's it." But the truth was simpler. They weren't following leads. The leads were following them. In the briefing room, Evan spread out photos on the table. Rachel Miller, the mail depot, the envelopes, Thomas Hale, the missing child case. Who else was connected to 2009, Evan asked the room. No one answered immediately. Mara finally spoke. Teachers, social workers, local officials, anyone involved in the search. Evan nodded. "Pull every name." As the list grew, something unsettling became clear. Most of those people still lived in Ashwood. That afternoon, Evan visited Grace Holloway. Former school counselor. Retired. Lived alone near the edge of town. Grace opened the door with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wondered when you'd come," she said softly. Evan studied her face. "Why?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Because things that stay buried too long always come back." Her living room was immaculate. No photos, no clutter, no warmth. "Rachel spoke to you recently," Evan said. Grace nodded. She asked questions. "About what?" Grace folded her hands. "About a boy." Evan's pulse jumped. "Lucas Reed?" Grace closed her eyes for just a moment. "I tried to forget," she said. "We all did." Evan leaned forward. "Forget what?" Grace opened her eyes again, glossy now. "That we failed him." She wouldn't say more. No matter how Evan pressed, she shut down, retreating behind silence like a locked door. That night, another envelope appeared, this time taped to the door of the public library. No name, just 3 words written in thick, uneven ink. "Remember what you did." Ashwood woke to police tape and panic. At the library, Evan stood, staring at the envelope while a small crowd gathered behind the barricade. Whispers spread. Phones came out. Fear multiplied. "Who's next?" someone shouted. Evan ignored them. His eyes were fixed on the handwriting. It looked familiar. Later, alone in his office, Evan pulled out the Lucas Reed case file again. Every page felt heavier now. Witness statements, search logs, anonymous tips. One report stood out. An envelope had been submitted back then. Anonymous, never opened, marked as irrelevant. Evan's hands went cold. He checked the evidence log. The envelope had been destroyed during a routine purge. "Jesus," he whispered. That night, Evan dreamed of the mail depot. The trees pressed in closer than they should have. A child's voice echoed through the dark. "Why didn't you help me?" He woke gasping. The next morning brought another shock. Grace Holloway was found dead in her home. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a single envelope placed on her chest, sealed, unopened. Mara looked sick when she told him. "This is escalation," she said. Evan stared at the wall behind her. "No," he said quietly. "This is completion." Grace's death sent shockwaves through town, and it brought something else with it. Guilt. People started talking, not to police, to each other. Rumors surfaced about meetings, about decisions made quietly, about protecting reputations instead of children. At a town council meeting that night, voices rose. "We were told not to talk." Someone said it would ruin lives. "Who said that?" Evan watched from the back of the room. Every word tightened the knot in his chest. Someone had pulled the strings. Someone had convinced people to stay silent. And now that silence was killing them. After the meeting, Evan received another message. "It's not just about Lucas," he typed back. "Then what is it about?" The reply came after a long pause. "It's about all the letters you ignored." Evan closed his eyes. The past wasn't just resurfacing, it was accusing. Back at the station, Evan made a decision. He gathered every unopened envelope, every copy, every mention. He locked them in the evidence room. Then he turned the key, not to protect the town, but to protect himself. Outside, Ashwood's streets glowed under streetlights. Quiet again. But now the quiet felt like a warning. Because whoever was behind this wasn't done exposing secrets. They were carefully choosing the order, and Evan was getting closer to the center of it all. Evan stood alone in the evidence room long after everyone else had gone home. The envelopes sat inside a clear lockbox lined up like silent witnesses. Different ages, different placements, same intent, control. He stared at them until his eyes burned. He didn't open a single one, not because he was following procedure, but because something inside him already knew. The killer wasn't asking a question, they were reminding. By the end of the week, Ashwood had changed its habits. Windows stayed shut, churches filled up, people avoided eye contact in public places like looking too long at someone might invite suspicion. Or memory. Mara brought Evan a fresh stack of reports. 3 more anonymous tips, she said. All about 2009, different voices, same story. Evan skimmed them. A late-night meeting, a decision made quietly, a search called off early. "Why didn't anyone talk back then?" Evan asked. Mara didn't answer right away. "Because someone convinced them it was for the greater good," she said finally. "And people like believing that." That afternoon, Evan paid a visit to Daniel Brooks, former town council member, still influential, still untouchable according to most. Daniel's home was large, clean, and too confident. He greeted Evan with a politician's smile. "Sheriff," he said warmly. "Terrible what's happening." Evan didn't sit. "Rachel Miller came to see you before she died." Daniel's smile thinned. "Did she?" "She did," Evan said. "She asked about Lucas Reed." Daniel sighed like a man tired of old stories. "That was a tragedy," he said, "but dragging it up now won't help anyone." "Rachel thought it would." Daniel's eyes flickered, just once. "She misunderstood things," he said carefully. "We were trying to protect the town." "Protect who?" Evan asked. Daniel straightened his tie. "Everyone." That night, Daniel Brooks found an envelope on his pillow. He didn't call the police. He didn't tell anyone. The next morning, his house was empty. Car still in the driveway. Phone left behind. Envelope unopened. Ashwood erupted. A missing former official. A growing body count. And a past that refused to stay quiet. Evan's phone buzzed nonstop. Press. State police. Angry residents. Then one message cut through the noise. "You're still avoiding the truth," Evan replied without thinking. "You want me to open it?" The response came slower than usual. "I want you to remember why you didn't." That sentence stayed with him. Later that night, Evan drove to the mail depot alone. It was officially off limits. He went anyway. The building loomed ahead, cracked concrete swallowed by moss and shadows. The trees pressed close, just like in his dream. Inside, the air was cold and stale. His flashlight swept across graffiti, broken furniture, and something else. Scratches on the wall, small, child-sized. Evan's throat tightened. He moved deeper toward the back room. There, half hidden under debris, was a box, metal, locked. He forced it open. Inside were items sealed in plastic. A sneaker, a school notebook, and a letter. Sealed, unopened. Evan staggered back. He remembered this. He remembered finding the box during the original search. Remembered being told to log it as abandoned junk. Remembered being young, newly promoted, eager to trust his superiors. "You didn't see this?" A voice from the past. It echoed in his head. His phone buzzed. "That box was your first mistake." Evan dropped the phone. By the time he returned to the station, sirens were already screaming. Daniel Brooks' body had been found, near the river. Same careful markings. Same envelope placed beside him, unopened. Mara met Evan at the door. Her eyes searched his face. "You went to the depot," she said. "Yes." "And?" Evan hesitated. "I think this started because we chose silence." Mara swallowed. "And how does it end?" Evan looked past her, at the evidence room. "At the letters," he said quietly. That night, Evan finally unlocked the box. He sat alone, hands shaking. The room felt too small, too quiet. He picked up the first envelope. Not his. Rachel's. He broke the seal. The letter inside wasn't long, just one sentence. "We all agreed to forget him." Evan closed his eyes, because now he remembered everything. And he knew something far worse was coming, not just for the town, but for him. A forgotten past returns, with disturbing messages and silent warnings. Evan sat motionless long after the letter slipped from his fingers. The sentence echoed louder than any scream. "We all agreed to forget him." The room felt colder, as if the words themselves had opened something that could not be shut again. Evan pressed his palms against the metal table, grounding himself. For years he had told himself the same lie everyone else had, that they had done everything they could, that sometimes children vanished without answers, that guilt was useless. Now the lie was exposed. He sealed the letter back into evidence and locked it away. Not because it was finished with him, but because he wasn't ready to face the rest. One truth at a time. Anything more might break him. By morning, Ashwood was no longer a town in denial. It was a town unraveling. People didn't wait for police statements anymore. They filled the gaps themselves. Old rumors resurfaced, names whispered again after years of polite silence. Everyone remembered something. Everyone remembered differently. Evan watched it happen from his office window. He knew this chaos was intentional. The person behind the letters wasn't just killing. They were forcing memory back into a place that had buried it alive. Mara knocked once and entered, her expression tense. "Another envelope," she said. Evan closed his eyes briefly. "Where?" "Rachel's old house." They arrived to find police tape fluttering in the breeze. The small home looked exactly as Rachel had left it. Nothing broken, nothing disturbed. The envelope sat on the kitchen table, centered carefully, like a final thought. This one wasn't sealed. Evan froze when he saw it. "Don't," Mara said softly. "I'll bag it." But Evan shook his head. "No, I need to see it." Inside was a photograph. A group of adults standing outside the elementary school, 15 years younger, 15 years more careless. Evan recognized himself. Immediately younger, thinner. Standing just behind Daniel Brooks, behind Grace Holloway, behind Thomas Hale. At the edge of the photo, barely visible, stood a boy. Lucas Reed. Evan's breath caught. On the back of the photo, written in the same ink as the letters, "You stood there and said nothing." Mara stared at the image. This was taken after he disappeared. Evan nodded. The memory came rushing back now, no longer blurred. A meeting held quietly. A decision disguised as concern. They had been told the boy was troubled, that his home life was unstable, that public panic would destroy the town. And Evan, new to his badge, had believed them. That afternoon, Evan was called to the hospital. Thomas Hale had regained consciousness. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Thomas looked smaller now, his confidence stripped away by weakness. When he saw Evan, tears filled his eyes. "I tried to stop it," Thomas whispered. "Stop what?" Evan asked. "The forgetting," Thomas said. "They said it was best, that the boy would be found eventually, that talking would only make things worse." "And when he wasn't?" Evan asked. Thomas's face crumpled. "We moved on." Evan clenched his jaw. Before he could ask more, Thomas gripped his wrist. "He's not doing this for revenge," Thomas said urgently. "He's doing it to finish something." Evan frowned. "Who is he?" Thomas shook his head, panic rising. "I don't know. But he knows us. He knows what we did, and he won't stop until every lie is exposed." The machines began to beep faster. A nurse rushed in. Thomas fell silent again. That night, Evan sat in his car outside the station long after his shift ended. He replayed the photograph in his mind, the boy's face, the adults who had turned away. His phone buzzed. "Do you remember the sound he made when no one listened?" Evan typed back slowly. "Why are you doing this?" The reply came minutes later. Because silence was the real crime. Another envelope appeared before dawn, this time at Evan's doorstep. No knock, no warning. Inside was a recording device, old, scratched. Mara listened beside him as Evan pressed play. A child's voice filled the room, thin, shaking. "They said they'd help me," the voice whispered. "They said if I stayed quiet, it would be okay." The recording ended abruptly. Mara covered her mouth. Evan stared at the wall, unable to breathe. That morning, Ashwood received its final warning. Every mailbox in town contained a single sheet of paper. No envelopes, no names, just one sentence printed clearly. "You all chose to forget him." Panic erupted. Parents demanded answers. Former officials vanished behind locked doors. The town that once protected its image now tore itself apart, searching for someone to blame. Evan stood at the center of it all. And for the first time, he understood. This wasn't about punishment. It was about exposure. That evening, Evan returned to the mail, and to Depot again. Not alone this time. Mara followed silently. They stood where the box had been found, where the truth had been ignored. "He planned this for years," Mara said. Evan nodded. "He needed us to remember before he could finish it." "And what happens when he does?" she asked. Evan didn't answer, because deep down, he knew. The killer wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Waiting for the town to finally see itself clearly. And when that happened, there would be nothing left to protect anyone. Not even Evan. As they left the depot, Evan felt the weight of every unopened letter pressing against his chest. Each one carried a truth. Each truth demanded a price. And Ashwood was about to pay it, because the past had returned. And it was done asking to be heard. Evan did not go home after the mailboxes. He stayed at the station until the sky turned a pale gray, listening to the town fall apart. Parents demanded patrols. Business owners wanted curfews. Pastors asked for protection. And under every request, Evan heard the same thing. "Tell us it wasn't us." Mara brought him coffee he didn't touch. "They're scared," she said. "They should be," Evan replied. Mara studied him. "You're thinking about Lucas." "I'm thinking about all of it." He opened the Lucas Reed file again, this time not as a cold case, but as a wound. The reports felt different now. The wording, the missing pages, the signatures. Small details he had accepted back then because he was young, eager, loyal. A knock sounded at his office door. Deputy Nolan Price stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Sheriff, there's someone here who refuses to leave." "Who?" Price hesitated. "Rachel's landlord. Says he found something in her storage unit." Evan stood so fast his chair squeaked. The storage unit smelled like dust and cardboard. Rachel's belongings were stacked neatly, labeled in black marker like she expected to. "Return." Mara shone a flashlight over the boxes. The landlord, a nervous man named Curtis, pointed to a plastic bin. "This one." It was taped shut. Evan sliced the tape. Inside were folders. Not official county folders, personal. Handwritten tabs. 2009. Lucas. Meeting. Letters. Mara's eyes widened. She was collecting evidence. Evan pulled out a yellowed notebook. Pages filled with dates, names, short notes. The handwriting matched the list he'd found in her desk drawer. Rachel had been building a timeline, and at the bottom of the bin wrapped in cloth was a small metal key. No label, no explanation, just a key. Evan held it up. The teeth were worn, used often, then abandoned. Mara leaned closer. "That could be for anything, or for something someone didn't want opened," Evan said. Curtis shifted. "There was also this." He handed Evan a sealed envelope, newer paper this time, clean, not weathered like the others. On the front was a single word, confession. Mara stiffened. "Open it?" Evan's throat tightened. "Not here." They returned to the station. Evan placed the envelope on his desk like it might explode. He stared at it for a long time, then finally broke the seal. Inside was a typed page, no signature, no name, just a short paragraph. "We agreed the boy would be labeled a runaway. We agreed to stop the search before the press arrived. We agreed to protect the town. The man who pushed it hardest was not Daniel Brooks, it was someone closer to you." Evan felt the room tilt. Mara read over his shoulder, then whispered, "Closer to you?" Evan's hands shook. "That's what it says." Mara frowned. "It could be manipulation. Or it could be the truth." He shoved the paper into a folder and stood. "Pull my personnel file from 2009, every memo, every email, everything." Mara didn't move. "Evan, if this is aiming at you..." "It already is," he snapped, then softened. "Sorry, I need facts." Mara nodded and left. Evan went to the restroom and splashed water on his face. In the mirror, he looked older than he remembered. His father's eyes stared back at him, tired and stern. When he returned, his phone buzzed again. "The key is for the thing you pretended never existed." He stared at the message until his vision blurred. "What thing?" he whispered. Mara came back with a thin folder and a thicker one. "This is you," she said quietly, tapping the thin file. "And this is the town council archive from that year. Rachel requested copies. Some pages are missing." Evan opened his file. A commendation. A resignation letter from someone he barely remembered. Then a memo he had never seen. Subject: Community Risk Management. It listed potential liabilities if the missing child case attracted negative attention. It recommended controlled communication and containment. At the bottom was a signature. Chief of Police 2009, Walter Cole. Evan's breath left him in a rush. "My father," he said, barely audible. Mara's face went tight. "Evan..." He stared at the signature as if it might change. His father had died 2 years after retiring. Evan had mourned him the way children mourn complicated parents. Half love, half resentment, half questions never asked. A memory flickered. A kitchen table. His father's voice, low and firm. Sometimes, son, the town needs you to carry what others can't. Evan's stomach turned. Mara spoke carefully. Does that mean your father covered it up? Evan swallowed. It means he made decisions. And someone thinks you were part of them. Evan's phone buzzed again. He taught you well. Mara watched him read it. We need state police, she said. Evan shook his head. Not yet. The moment we bring outsiders in, this person escalates. They want spectacle. They're already giving it to us. Evan leaned back, trying to breathe. If my father was involved, then the truth is bigger than a killer. It's the whole town. Mara hesitated, then asked softly, Evan, what if the killer is someone from that time? Someone who lost something? Evan looked at the Lucas file. Or someone who gained something. Outside, the station's front doors opened. Voices rose. Evan stood, walked into the lobby, and found a crowd gathered behind the desk. A woman with wild hair and shaking hands pushed forward. You have to listen, she cried. You have to stop him. Evan approached. Ma'am, who are you? She swallowed hard. My name is April Reed. Mara froze beside him. Evan's throat went dry. Reed, as in Lucas? April nodded, tears spilling now. I'm his mother. The room went silent. April gripped Evan's sleeve like she might fall. They told me he ran away, she whispered. They told me I was unstable. They told me if I kept shouting, they'd take my younger daughter too. Mara's eyes widened. Who told you that? April shook her head violently. I don't know. A man, a suit, a smile, and your father stood behind him and said nothing. Evan felt every eye in the lobby on him. April's voice dropped. 2 nights ago, I got a letter, the first one in years. It said I would finally get the truth, but it also said I would lose what I have left. Evan guided her into his office, closing the door on the staring crowd. Show me the letter, he said. April pulled an envelope from her coat. It was old, like the others, and it was sealed. On the front, open it when you're ready to bleed. April's hands trembled. I can't, she whispered. I've waited so long, but I'm terrified. Evan stared at the seal, then at April's face. He believed her fear. He also believed the warning. Mara spoke gently. April will protect you. April laughed, sharp and broken. Like you protected my son? Silence. Evan finally said, We're going to do this right. I promise. April's eyes searched his. Promises don't bring back children. Evan nodded. No, but truth can stop more dying. April flinched as a sudden bang echoed from somewhere outside. Mara rushed to the window. Sheriff, Evan's phone buzzed, a video file. He hesitated, then pressed play. The screen showed a dark room, a single chair, and a child's sneaker hanging from the chair like a warning. A voice spoke off camera, calm and close. You're remembering now, Sheriff. Good. Keep going. 2 more letters, 2 more lies, then you'll know what you did. The video ended. April covered her mouth, sobbing. Mara stared at Evan, pale. 2 more letters? Evan locked the office door and lowered the blinds. For a moment, it felt like the only safe room in town. April sat hunched on the chair, arms wrapped around herself. That sneaker, she whispered. Lucas had one just like it. Mara pulled her phone out. I'll trace the, sender. I'll also check cameras near your house. Someone delivered that letter. April's laugh was sharp and tired. Cameras won't show what people chose not to see. Evan opened Rachel's notebook again and flipped to the back. The final page held a tighter list written like a warning. Evan Cole, Walter Cole, April Reed, Thomas Hale, Grace Holloway, Daniel Brooks, and one more name underlined twice. Mara leaned closer. Dr. Nora Klein? Evan nodded. She consulted on Lucas, then her notes vanished from the file. April's eyes flickered. I remember her. She looked at me like I was the problem. Evan felt the picture widen. Someone had shaped the story in 2009. Someone had decided what Ashwood would believe. His phone buzzed. The second letter is not in the evidence room. Evan's mouth went dry. Mara read it over his shoulder. They're moving the goalposts. April stood abruptly. What second letter? Evan kept his voice even. A countdown. That's what it feels like. Mara's tone hardened. Evan, we can't keep letting them set the pace. Evan stared at the small key in his palm, its worn teeth catching the light. Then we don't. We find what this opens. We get there first. April's hands trembled. And if it leads to my son, Evan met her gaze, then you hear the truth with witnesses, not alone, not silenced. Mara's radio crackled with Nolan Price's voice, breathless. Sheriff, courthouse archives, door forced. There's an envelope on the steps addressed to you. It says, for the son. Evan felt his stomach drop. For the son, Mara repeated, stunned. Evan's thoughts snapped to his father, then to himself. He clenched the key and stood. We're going, now. April grabbed his sleeve. Don't leave me. Mara nodded once. She comes with us. They moved fast into the night, and in the back of Evan's mind, the killer's calm voice returned. 2 more letters, 2 more lies. Ashwood wasn't being hunted by a stranger. It was being confronted by the part of itself it had buried. When memories lie and trust starts falling apart. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, shining under the streetlights like black glass. Evan's boots hit the bottom stair and stopped. An envelope sat dead center on the top step, too clean for the weather, protected beneath a clear plastic food container like someone cared about keeping it dry. Mara moved first, gloved hands raised. She crouched, lifted the container, and stared at the writing. For the son, she read quietly. Evan felt the words land somewhere deep, like a hook. April Reed stood behind them, arms tight around herself, breathing fast through her mouth as if she didn't trust her lungs. Is that for Lucas? She whispered. Evan didn't answer. He couldn't, because the phrase could mean too many things. Mara bagged the envelope without opening it, then glanced at Evan. We take it, inside. Cameras here might have caught the drop. Inside the courthouse, the security guard on duty looked half asleep and fully terrified. Mara flashed her badge, and the man let them through with shaking hands. Someone broke in, he said. Quiet, no alarm, just the archive door, like they knew the code. Evan followed him down a hallway that smelled of old paper and cleaning chemicals. The archive room door was ajar, its keypad panel hanging loose. Nolan Price waited inside, pale and furious. Sheriff, he said, they weren't here for money. They tore through one cabinet, only one. He pointed to a metal drawer dumped on the floor. Files lay scattered like dead leaves. Evan knelt, picked up a folder, and saw the label. Reed Lucas, 2009. His mouth went dry. They took something from the case, Mara said. Evan's mind ran fast. Or they returned something. April pushed past them, eyes wild. My son's file was here? Evan steadied his voice. Copies, records, they shouldn't have been accessible. April laughed once, sharp and hollow. Nothing should have happened to him either. Mara's phone buzzed. She listened, then looked up. Traffic cam on Elm caught a dark sedan stopping here at 9:42. Plates covered. Evan stared at the empty drawer. This was planned. Nolan shifted. Do we open the envelope? Evan hesitated. Then he heard the sound again in his memory, the child's whisper from the recording device. They said if I stayed quiet, it would be okay. Evan nodded once. Not here. Back at the station, Evan locked the envelope in his office desk and set the key from Rachel's storage unit beside it. They looked like parts of the same sentence. April sat in the corner chair, eyes fixed on the blinds as if she expected someone to peer through. Mara spoke softly. "April, do you have family in Portland? Someone you trust?" April shook her head. "I trusted this town once. Look how that went." Evan poured water into a paper cup and offered it. April didn't take it. "You said you'd do this right," she said, "so do it. Open it." Evan's fingers hovered over the seal. A mistake would cost another life. A delay might do the same. Mara watched him, jaw clenched. If the message is for Lucas, she has a right to hear it. Evan swallowed. "We open it together. Witnessed. Recorded." He set his phone on the desk, hit record, then slit the envelope with a letter opener. Inside was not a page. It was a small folded map, a printed street grid of Ashwood, old enough that 2 neighborhoods didn't exist yet. A red circle marked a spot near the river, and beneath the map was a single line, typed. "You buried the truth where you buried your guilt." April's hands flew to her mouth. "The river," she breathed. Evan stared at the circle. It wasn't the water itself. It was the wooded strip behind the riverbank where the town had once dumped broken concrete from old construction projects. Mara's eyes sharpened. "We need a search team." Evan shook his head slowly. "Not yet. If we roll lights and sirens, they'll know." Nolan frowned. "Sheriff, people are already dying." "I know," Evan said, "but this person wants attention. We move quiet." April stood, voice trembling. "You're talking like this is a game. My son is not a clue." Evan met her gaze. "I'm talking like the person doing this is listening to every breath we take." Silence filled the room. Then Mara's phone buzzed again. She read, face tightening. "They just posted something," she said, "on a local community forum, anonymous account." Evan's stomach sank. "What did they post?" Mara turned the screen. A single sentence. "Ask Sheriff Cole what he promised Lucas Reed." Evan felt the office tilt. April looked from Mara to Evan, eyes widening. "What did you promise?" Evan opened his mouth. No words came, because the memory that surfaced wasn't clean. It wasn't complete. It was a fragment, sharp and wrong. A child's face in flashlight beam, mud on small shoes, a voice begging, and Evan's own voice, too eager, too comforting. "I'll make sure you get home." April's voice cracked. "Did you see him?" Mara stepped closer, protective. "Evan, answer her." Evan's throat tightened. I think I did." April staggered back as if struck. "You think?" she whispered. "You think you saw my son?" Evan's eyes burned. "It was 15 years ago. I was on the search. There were hundreds of moments, but now it's coming back in pieces." April's hands shook with rage. "Pieces don't raise children." Evan took a breath. "I'm not defending myself. I'm telling you the truth I have." April laughed again, and this time it sounded like grief turned into teeth. Mara lowered her voice. "The killer wants you two to turn on each other." April snapped. "Don't call him the killer like he's a stranger. He knows everything. He's been here. He's laughing at us." Nolan cleared his throat. "We should go to the river now." Evan nodded. "Just us. No radios unless necessary." They drove in 2 unmarked cars, headlights dimmed as they turned off the main road. The forest thickened, branches bending like dark arms over the hood. At the riverbank, the air smelled of wet bark and cold stone. The water moved quietly, carrying reflections of the moon. Mara shone her light toward the marked area on the map. "There," she said. They climbed down a short embankment into the strip of woods. Underfoot, the ground was uneven, littered with broken slabs of concrete and rusted rebar. Old town debris. April's breathing grew ragged behind them. Evan stopped at a half-buried patch where the soil looked disturbed, newer than everything around it. Mara crouched, scraped away leaves. Her gloved fingers hit something hard. Plastic. She pulled. A sealed storage tote emerged from the dirt like a coffin. April made a sound between a sob and a gasp. Evan's heart pounded. "Open it," he said, voice low. Mara cracked the lid. Inside were items wrapped in plastic, a child's jacket, a small backpack, and a stack of envelopes bound with twine. All sealed, all labeled with names. Evan's name, Mara's, Thomas Hale's, Daniel Brooks, Walter Cole's, and one more name that made Evan's blood run cold. Sienna Cole, his wife. April's voice was a whisper. Why is her name there? Evan stared at it, throat tight. She wasn't even in town in 2009. Mara's eyes widened. Unless someone made sure she was. Nolan stepped back, scanning the trees. We're not alone. A branch snapped in the darkness. April grabbed Evan's arm. Who's there? Evan swung his flashlight. Nothing. Only shadows shifting with the wind. Mara lifted the bound envelopes carefully, as if they were alive. These are the two. More letters, she said. Evan shook his head. No. This is a whole cemetery of letters. April's eyes fixed on the jacket. Is that his? Evan didn't touch it. He couldn't. Because if it was, the town had buried evidence for 15 years. And if it wasn't, someone was playing with a mother's soul. Mara's voice trembled. We take this back. We log it. We keep it safe. Evan nodded, but his eyes stayed on Sienna's name. The killer had reached into his grief, reached into his marriage, pulled a thread he didn't know existed. As they carried the tote up the embankment, Evan felt the weight of the past shift. Not lifting, settling deeper. Because now the question wasn't just who killed Rachel. It was who had been shaping Ashwood's stories all along, and why they had written Sienna into the last chapter. Back at the station, the tote sat on the evidence table under harsh fluorescent light. It looked smaller indoors, but the thread inside it felt larger. Mara started paperwork with hands that wouldn't stop moving. Chain of custody, she muttered. If this ends in court, it has to hold. Nolan paced near the door. Sheriff, we should call a full team. Dogs, forensics, state. Evan's voice stayed low. And give the person watching us a parade? They want spectacle. April hit the table. My son isn't spectacle. Evan flinched, then steadied. I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to hear the truth. April pointed at the bundles. Open Lucas's, now. Mara shook her head. If we open one, we open them all. That's how pressure works. Evan reached for the envelope with Sienna's name, then stopped, fingers hovering over the ink like it might burn. Someone had turned his wife into bait. He whispered, Why her? The front desk phone rang. Price answered, listened, then looked up. Sheriff, April's house. Someone left a package on the porch. It's already inside. April's face drained. My daughter is there. Evan grabbed his keys. Want Mara with me. Nolan, lock this room down. No one touches those envelopes. Mara nodded once, eyes hard. And if it's another letter? Evan's jaw tightened. Then it's a warning we can't afford to miss. Outside, rain tapped the windows like impatient fingers. Evan felt the town closing in, every secret pressed against the glass. He didn't know who to trust anymore, only that trust was the next thing the killer meant to bury tonight. Hidden relationships, forbidden choices, and crimes that changed lives. Evan drove faster than he should have. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the town into broken lines of light and shadow. April sat rigid in the back seat, phone pressed to her ear, whispering her daughter's name over and over as if repetition could keep the child safe. Mara followed close behind in the second car. No sirens, no radio chatter. Silence was safer now. April's house appeared. At the end of the street, porch light on, door closed. Evan pulled up hard and was out of the car before the engine stopped. He took the steps 2 at a time and tried the handle. Locked. "Lily?" April shouted, pounding on the door. Evan circled the house, scanning windows. No movement. No lights inside except the porch glow spilling through the front room. Mara jogged up beside him. Back door. It was unlocked. They entered slowly. The house smelled of detergent and rain-soaked carpet. Evan's pulse thundered in his ears. He moved room to room, weapon drawn but low, afraid of what he might see. The living room was untouched. The kitchen, too. April's sob caught in her throat as she rushed down the hallway. "Lily!" she cried. Evan reached the last door. The bedroom. He pushed it open. Lily Reed sat on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide and dry. She wasn't crying. She was holding something in her lap. An envelope. April rushed to her, collapsing into tears as she pulled her daughter into her arms. "Oh my God, baby, are you okay?" Lily nodded slowly. "He didn't touch me." Evan's stomach dropped. "He?" Lily looked up at him. "The man who came." Mara stiffened. "Did you see his face?" Lily shook her head. "He wore a hat. He told me not to be scared. He said he was helping my mom." April pulled back, panic flashing across her face. "Helping how?" Lily swallowed. "He said she deserved the truth, and that you would understand soon." Evan's jaw tightened. "Did he say anything else?" Evan asked gently. Lily nodded. He said sometimes people make choices because they're afraid, and sometimes those choices hurt kids forever." The room fell silent. Evan reached for the envelope in Lily's lap. April's hand shot out. "No." Mara stepped in, voice calm but firm. "April, we need to know what he left." April's eyes burned with anger. "He's using my children to punish you." Evan met her gaze. "He's using all of us." Slowly, April released the envelope. On the front, in careful handwriting, were 3 words. "For the sister." Evan opened it. Inside was a folded page and a flash drive taped neatly to the corner. He unfolded the page. "Your brother didn't disappear. He was silenced. And the people who did it still live freely." April let out a broken sound and sank onto the bed beside Lily. Evan picked up the flash drive. Mara shook her head. "Not here." They returned to the station under a heavy sky. Lily sat in the break room with a blanket and a juice box, watched closely by Nolan. April stayed with her, hands never leaving her daughter's shoulders. In the evidence room, Evan plugged the flash drive into a secure computer. Mara stood beside him. The screen flickered to life. A video began. It showed a meeting room, small, plain, a table surrounded by chairs. The timestamp read, October 2009. Evan leaned closer. He recognized the room. Town hall, conference room. The video angle was low, hidden. Voices filled the speakers. "This cannot go public," a man said, Daniel Brooks. "If we keep searching, the press will tear us apart," another voice added. Grace Holloway, a third voice, firm and measured. "We need to think long-term." Walter Cole, Evan's breath caught. The video continued. "There's no evidence of foul play," someone said. Thomas Hale, a pause. "And if there is?" a quieter voice asked. Evan recognized that voice too, his own. "I can talk to the boy," younger Evan said on the recording. "He trusts officers. If he comes back, we handle it quietly." Mara's hand flew to her mouth. The room on the screen went still. Daniel Brooks leaned forward. "And if he doesn't?" Silence. Walter Cole spoke. Then we protect the town. The video ended. Evan felt like the floor had dropped away. That's not a confession, Mara said softly. It's worse. It's intent, Evan whispered. Another file played automatically. This one was audio only. A child's voice. I'm scared, Lucas whispered. They said if I stayed here it would be okay. A man's voice answered. Calm, reassuring. You're doing the right thing. Evan's chest burned. He knew that voice. It was his father's. The audio cut off abruptly. Mara turned away, eyes wet. Outside the evidence room, April's scream echoed through the station. Evan stepped out quickly. April stood shaking, phone crushed in her hand. They took her, she cried. They took Lily. Evan's heart slammed against his ribs. Who? April held up her phone. A message glowed on the screen. Truth has a price. Come alone. Attached was a photo. Lily blindfolded, sitting in a chair. Mara swore under her breath. No, Evan said firmly. We don't do this their way. April grabbed his jacket. That's my daughter. Evan looked at Mara. She nodded once. We tracked the phone, Mara said. We find them. Nolan rushed over. Signals bouncing. They know what they're doing. Evan closed his eyes for half a second. Then he opened them, resolve hardening. This ends tonight, he said. Not with another letter, not with another child. His phone buzzed again. You promised to keep him safe, Evan typed back. Where are you? The reply came instantly. At the place where you broke that promise. Evan knew where that was. The mail depot. Rain poured harder as they moved. Mara drove. Evan stared out the window, memories colliding with reality. April's voice shook from the back seat. If she dies... She won't, Evan said. He needed to believe that. At the depot, lights glowed inside, too bright, too deliberate. Mara slowed the car. This is a trap. Yes, Evan said, but it's also a confession. They stepped into the building. Inside, the space had been transformed, chairs lined up, cameras mounted on tripods. A stage of truth. At the center sat Lily, unharmed, watching them. And behind her stood a man Evan recognized instantly. Dr. Nora Klein. She smiled calmly. You came, she said. Evan's fists clenched. Where is my daughter? April screamed. Nora gestured. Right there, alive, for now. Mara raised her weapon. Get away from her. Nora didn't move. You're all here because you chose silence, Nora said evenly. I chose memory. Evan stepped forward. You killed Rachel. Nora tilted her head. No, I reminded her. Guilt did the rest. April shook with rage. You're a monster. Nora's eyes softened. I was a witness, and you all erased me. Evan's heart pounded. Lucas told me everything, Nora continued, about the meeting, about the promises, about the place you left him. Mara whispered, Where is Lucas? Nora's smile faded. That, she said, is the last letter. And the truth hung in the air, waiting to be opened. Nora Klein did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already silent, stretched thin by fear, guilt, and 15 years of lies finally standing face to face. Lily sat perfectly still on the chair, blindfold removed now, her hands resting in her lap. She wasn't crying. That scared Evan more than screams ever could. April took one step forward. If you hurt her, Nora lifted a hand gently. I didn't bring her here to harm her. I brought her here to make sure you listened. Mara kept her weapon trained on Nora, unwavering. Step away from the child now. Nora smiled faintly. You won't shoot, not in front of her, and not when you still need answers. Evan felt the truth of that settle like a weight. Where is Lucas? He asked. Nora's expression changed. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to grief. "He's where you left him," she said. April staggered, gripping the back of a chair to stay upright. "That's not an answer," Evan said, voice tight. Nora stepped toward him slowly. "It is the only one." Mara moved to block her. "Don't!" Nora stopped, respectful. "I was the first person Lucas trusted," she said softly. "He told me about the meetings, the whispers, the promises." Evan swallowed. "You were his therapist." "I was supposed to protect him," Nora replied. "Instead, I was ordered to document him, label him, quiet him." April screamed, a raw sound that tore through the building. "You knew," she sobbed. "You knew my son was scared." Nora nodded. "Yes? And you let them do it anyway?" Nora met April's gaze. "I tried to stop it. I went to Walter Cole, to Daniel Brooks, to Grace Holloway. I told them the boy was in danger." Her eyes flicked to Evan. "And I told you." Evan felt like he'd been punched. "You don't remember," Nora said. "Of course you don't. You chose not to." The memory hit him sideways, a hallway, late night. A woman standing too, close, speaking too urgently. "We can't leave him there." Evan had been exhausted, overwhelmed. He had nodded. "I'll pass it on." He hadn't. April collapsed to her knees. "You all failed him," she whispered. Nora's voice shook for the first time. "Yes." Mara tightened her grip. "This doesn't justify murder." Nora shook her head. "I didn't murder anyone," Evan snapped. "Rachel Miller is dead." Nora looked at him. "Rachel chose to confront the truth alone. Guilt is lethal when it finally wakes up." "That's convenient," Mara said coldly. Nora didn't argue. "Grace Holloway?" Evan pressed. "She swallowed pills," Nora said. "I gave her the letter. I didn't force her hand." "Daniel Brooks?" Evan said. Nora hesitated. "He ran," she said. "He panicked. Slipped on wet stone by the river. The envelope was already in my pocket." April laughed bitterly. "You're rewriting history like they did." Nora closed her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe history has many authors." Mara stepped forward. "Enough. You're under arrest." Nora looked at Lily. "You can take me," she said. "But if you do it now, you won't know where Lucas is." April gasped. "You know where my son is?" Nora nodded slowly. "I know where he was last left." Evan's heart pounded. "Tell us." Nora met his eyes. "Open the letters." Mara snapped. "No." Nora smiled sadly. "You see? Same instinct. Delay, control." She gestured to the bound envelope stacked on the table nearby, recovered from the riverbank. "Each one tells a piece of what you did," she continued. "Each one brings you closer to him." Evan looked at Lily, at April, at Mara. "How do we know this isn't another manipulation?" Mara asked. Nora's gaze hardened. "Because if I wanted chaos, I would have released the recordings publicly. The meetings, the voices, the promises." She leaned forward. "I didn't. I wanted acknowledgement. From you." Evan felt something crack. "You used my wife," he said quietly. Nora flinched. "I warned her." That stopped him. "She came to me years ago," Nora said. "Asked why her husband woke up screaming, why he drank, why he avoided the river." Evan stared. "She wanted answers," Nora continued. "I told her the truth would destroy you." April whispered, "And she stayed." Nora nodded. "She loved you enough to carry it." Mara lowered her weapon a fraction. "That envelope with her name," Evan said. "What's in it?" Nora looked at him carefully. Her choice. Silence spread again. Evan moved to the table. His hand hovered over the envelope marked Sienna Cole. Mara shook her head slightly. April whispered, "Please." Evan broke the seal. The letter inside was written in Sienna's handwriting. "Evan, if you're reading this, it means you finally stopped running. I knew about Lucas before you ever told me. I knew because you talked in your sleep, because you flinched every time a child cried, because the truth doesn't stay buried, it leaks. I didn't leave you because I hated you, I stayed because I loved you, but love doesn't erase what we allow. If this is happening now, it means someone remembered what you tried to forget. Listen to them. Do the right thing this time. Evan folded the letter slowly. April's voice was hoarse. She knew. Yes, Evan said, she did. Nora watched him closely. Now you understand why the town couldn't stay quiet. Mara spoke firmly. Where is Lucas? Nora pointed toward the back room. There's a door behind the stage, she said. Locked. The key Rachel hid. Evan's breath caught. He reached into his pocket, the small metal key. Mara moved first, opening the door with her weapon raised. The room beyond was smaller, colder, a concrete space with a single light hanging overhead. Against the far wall stood a makeshift memorial. Photographs, candles, drawings, in childish handwriting, and in the center a small wooden box. April screamed his name. Evan felt his knees weaken. Mara opened the box. Inside were bones carefully wrapped. A final letter rested on top. Nora whispered, "They moved him after he died, buried him under concrete. I found him years later." April collapsed. Mara closed her eyes. Evan picked up the final letter with shaking hands. It was addressed to all of them, and it said only one thing. You chose the town over the child. Now choose truth over yourselves. Evan turned to Nora. It's over, he said. Nora nodded. For him, not for you. Sirens wailed in the distance now, the outside world finally arriving. April clung to Lily, sobbing into her hair. Mara cuffed Nora gently. As they led her away, Nora looked back at Evan one last time. You can't undo what you allowed, she said, but you can stop protecting it. Evan nodded. He looked around the room, at the bones, the letters, the truth. And he knew Ashwood would never sleep the same again, because some crimes don't end with arrest. They end with remembering. Every new clue creates another mystery. No one was ready for the sirens, arrived too late to change anything. They cut through the night like an apology that didn't matter anymore. Red and blue lights washing over the trees, the broken concrete, the small wooden box that had already rewritten Ashwood's history. State troopers poured into the mail depot, voices overlapping, radios crackling, boots scraping against the floor. Evidence bags appeared, cameras flashed. But the truth had already landed. Evan stood a few steps back, watching the machine of justice grind into motion, and felt no relief. There was only a heavy, hollow awareness that something far older than this night had finally stopped pretending to sleep. April sat on the floor with Lily wrapped tightly in her arms. Her sobs had quieted into something more, too dangerous. Silence, the kind that follows when grief settles in permanently, when there is nothing left to ask for. Mara knelt beside her. We'll take care of him, she said softly. We'll make sure. April looked up, eyes red but focused. You already did, she said, not cruel, just factual. Now just don't lie about it. Mara nodded once. Nora Klein was escorted past them in cuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. As she passed Evan, she paused. This doesn't end with me, she said quietly. Evan didn't answer. He already knew. By dawn, the depot was sealed. Lucas Reed's remains were transported with care that came 15 years too late. A forensic team began cataloging everything. The letters, the recordings, the video files, the hidden memorial. Each item was logged, labeled, and removed from the place where Ashwood had buried its conscience. Evan returned to the station as the sky lightened. Reporters waited outside now. Microphones raised, questions sharpened. Sheriff Cole, is it true remains were found? Is this connected to the deaths? Was there a cover-up? Evan didn't stop. Inside, the station felt smaller, the walls closer, the past louder. Mara joined him in his office and closed the door. "She's lawyered up," she said. "Nora. She's not talking anymore." Evan nodded. "She doesn't need to." Mara hesitated. "State police want your statement about the 2009 meeting." Evan exhaled slowly. "I'll give it." "Everything?" "Yes." Mara studied him. "That will cost you." Evan met her gaze. "It already has." Hours later, Evan sat in a sterile interview room, a recorder blinking red between him and two investigators he'd never met. He spoke steadily, choosing truth over self-preservation for the first time in 15 years. He talked about the meeting, about the pressure, about his father, about his own silence. When he finished, one of the investigators leaned back. "You're aware this could lead to charges," he said. Evan nodded. "I am." "And you're still willing to put this on record?" "Yes." There was a pause. "Why now?" Evan thought of April, of Lily, of Sienna's letter. "Because pretending didn't save anyone," he said. When he left the room, he felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Outside, Ashwood buzzed. News alerts spread. Names resurfaced. People argued on sidewalks and in comment sections. Some defended the past. Others demanded blood. The town that had once agreed to forget was now tearing itself apart, trying to remember selectively. Evan drove home for the first time in days. His house greeted him with the same quiet, but it felt different now. Less empty. More honest. He set Sienna's letter on the kitchen table and stood there staring at it, as if she might walk in and tell him what to do next. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He frowned, then answered. "Sheriff Cole," a man said, calm, professional. "This is Assistant DA Mark Henson. We need to talk." Evan's shoulders tightened. "About Nora Klein?" "About Rachel Miller," Henson said, "and about 2 other deaths you may have overlooked." Evan's heart skipped. "What deaths?" Henson paused. "One apparent suicide in 2011, one fatal accident in 2013, both tied loosely to Lucas Reed." Evan closed his eyes. "Send me everything," he said. The files arrived an hour later. Evan spread them across his kitchen table, the way he had done with the letters days earlier. Names jumped out at him. Familiar ones, peripheral ones. A school janitor who'd testified in 2009 and later drowned after his truck rolled into the river. A volunteer search coordinator who'd overdosed on prescription medication 2 years after the case was closed. Both deaths ruled accidental. Both had received letters shortly before they died. Evan's pulse quickened. Nora hadn't been the beginning. She had been the loudest voice in a longer, quieter reckoning. At the station, Mara paced while Evan laid out the new information. "This goes back further than we thought," she said. "If letters were sent years ago, then whoever started this didn't just wake up recently." "Or Nora wasn't acting alone," Evan said. Mara stopped. "You think there's someone else?" "I think there's a pattern," Evan replied. "And patterns don't belong to one person." They pulled security footage from old public buildings, re-examined mail logs, cross-referenced handwriting analyses from letters spanning 15 years. Something didn't fit. The handwriting on the earliest letters didn't match Nora's. Mara stared at the comparison on the screen. "These strokes are different. Pressure's heavier. Less careful." Evan leaned closer. "Meaning?" "Meaning someone else started this," Mara said. "And Nora continued it." Evan felt a chill. That night he visited Nora in holding. She sat calmly on the bench, hands folded, eyes tired but alert. "You didn't start the letters," Evan said without preamble. Nora looked at him, then smiled faintly. No. Who did? She hesitated. Someone who loved Lucas more than I ever could. Evan frowned. April? Nora shook her head. No, she was too broken. Then who? Nora's gaze sharpened. Ask yourself who benefited most from the delay. Evan's stomach dropped. My father is dead, he said. Nora nodded, but his choices lived on, in protégés, in policies, in people who learned how to protect the town by any means. Names, Evan said quietly. Nora leaned back. There's a man who taught you what silence looks like. He's still here. Evan felt the walls close in. Who? He pressed. Nora smiled sadly. That's the last mystery you haven't faced. As Evan left the holding area, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, this time the message was short. You told the truth. Good. Evan stopped walking. Another message followed. Now look closer. Attached was a photo, a recent one. It showed the riverbank near Evan's house, and someone standing there watching. The figure was blurred, but the posture was unmistakable. Familiar. Evan's breath caught, because some mysteries didn't come from the past. They were still breathing, still watching. And Ashwood wasn't finished paying for its silence yet. Ashwood did not erupt all at once. It cracked slowly like ice under too much weight, each sound small but final. By the second night after the discovery at the depot, the town was no longer arguing about whether something terrible had happened. They were arguing about who deserved forgiveness and who deserved to be erased. Evan felt that shift everywhere he went. In the grocery store, at the gas station, in the way people stopped talking when he entered a room and then started again too loudly once he left. He spent that night, at the station, rereading the files the assistant district attorney had sent him. 2 deaths, both labeled accidents, both linked by timing, location, and a pattern that now felt impossible to ignore. Each victim had been present peripherally or directly during the original search for Lucas Reed. Each had received a letter weeks before their death. Each letter had never been opened. Mara sat across from him, arms crossed, eyes hollow with exhaustion. If these are connected, she said, and then this isn't a recent chain reaction, it's a long burn. Evan nodded, which means Nora wasn't the spark. She was the accelerant, Mara replied. They worked in silence for a while, marking timelines on a whiteboard. Names overlapped, dates clustered. One absence stood out more clearly the longer Evan stared at it. Walter Cole. His father's name appeared everywhere in policy and signatures and recommendations that quietly shifted responsibility away from individuals and into the foggy space of procedure. Even after his retirement, the language persisted, adopted by others who had learned from him. Evan felt something cold and precise settle in his chest. Silence was a skill, and his father had taught it well. At 3 a.m, the station phone rang. Mara answered, listened, then covered the receiver. It's April. She wants to talk to you. Evan took the call in his office. April's voice was steadier than he expected, stripped of hysteria and raw grief, replaced by something harder. They took Lucas from me once, she said. I won't let them take the truth too. I won't either, Evan replied. She exhaled slowly. There's something I never told anyone. Not the police, not Nora, not even my sister. Evan leaned forward. What is it? A man came to my house the week after the search stopped, April said. He wasn't in uniform. He said he worked with the department. Said he was helping clean things up. Evan's hand tightened around the phone. Do you remember his name? No, April said, but I remember his face, and I remember what he said. Evan waited. He told me Lucas had been found, she whispered. Not alive, and that if I made noise, I'd lose my daughter too. The words settled like lead. Why didn't you tell anyone? Evan asked quietly. Because I believed him, April said. And because 2 days later, child services showed up. Said they'd received concerns about my stability. Evan closed his eyes. Do you remember anything else about him? Yes, April said. He smelled like river water and cigarettes, and he wore a ring, silver, with a flat black stone. After the call ended, Evan sat motionless, replaying every memory he had of his father's colleagues, his mentors, the men who had stayed long after Walter Cole retired. One face surfaced uninvited, Deputy Chief Harold Finch. Finch had been present at the search, present at the meeting, present when the case was quietly shelved. He had inherited much of Walter Cole's authority and all of his methods. Evan realized with a jolt that Finch's name was missing from every recent discussion. Too obvious, too protected. Mara read his expression. You're thinking about Finch. Evan nodded. He fits, authority without spotlight, and he's still here. Mara frowned. If this goes where you think it does, we're talking about someone who's been shaping outcomes for decades. Then it's time those outcomes stopped being hidden, Evan said. They pulled Finch's file, his commendations, his transfers, his unexplained presence near each location where letters had appeared over the years. It wasn't enough for an arrest. It was enough for suspicion. By morning, the town council demanded answers. Evan stood before them, refusing to soften his words. There was a failure, he said. A collective one. And it's still unfolding. A councilman leaned forward. Are you accusing this town of murder? Evan met his gaze. I'm accusing it of silence. Outside, protesters gathered. Some carried signs demanding justice for Lucas Reed. Others demanded Evan's resignation. The split was clean and brutal. That afternoon, a package arrived at the station. No return address, no postage, just a box left at the front desk. Inside was a ring, silver, flat black stone. Mara stared at it. That's not subtle. Evan turned it over. Inside the band, a name was engraved. Finch. His phone buzzed. You're close. Careful where you point the light. Evan typed back. Why now? The reply came slower than usual. Because you finally stopped protecting the wrong people. That evening, Evan requested a private meeting with Finch. Official, documented. Mara sat in. Finch arrived calm, confident. The picture of a man who believed in his own untouchability. His eyes flicked briefly to the ring on the table. You wanted to see me, Finch asked. Evan slid the ring forward. April Reed remembers this. Finch's expression barely changed. Barely. You're making accusations without evidence, Finch said evenly. I'm asking questions, Evan replied. Like why your name doesn't appear on any recent lists. Like why letters started long before Nora Klein acted. Like why witnesses kept dying. Finch leaned back. You're emotional. Your father's legacy is clouding your judgment. Evan felt a flare of anger, then let it pass. My father taught me how to stay quiet, he said. I'm unlearning that. Finch smiled thinly. Be careful. You dig up enough mud, you drown in it. As Finch left, Mara whispered, That wasn't a denial. No, Evan said. It was a warning. That night, Evan didn't go home. He drove to the river instead, parking near the bank behind his house, the same stretch that appeared in the photo. He walked until the sound of water filled his ears. A figure stood ahead, outlined against the moonlight. Evan stopped. I know it's you. The man turned slowly. Harold Finch looked older up close, smaller, but his eyes were sharp. You always did fine things others missed, Finch said. Evan kept his voice steady. You threatened April Reed, Finch shrugged. I contained a problem. You killed people, Evan said. Finch shook his head. I gave them a choice, the same choice your father gave them. Silence or consequences. Evan felt sick. Lucas was a child. Finch's face hardened. Lucas was a liability. Evan's hand trembled. And Nora? She broke ranks, Finch said. I let her run until she became inconvenient. Evan realized then that the letters had been tools, not just messages, a system refined over years. Finch stepped closer. You want the town to survive? Finch asked. Then you let this end with her. Evan met his gaze. It ends with you. Sirens rose in the distance. Mara's voice crackled over the radio, calm and firm, calling Finch's name. Finch looked past Evan, then smiled sadly. You always were your father's son, he said. No, Evan replied. I'm not. Finch ran. Evan tackled him at the edge of the bank. They hit the ground hard, mud and water soaking through their clothes. Finch fought with desperation, years of control slipping away. Evan held on, fueled by something deeper than anger. When Mara arrived, Finch lay cuffed and silent, staring at the sky. As they took him away, Evan stood by the river, breathing hard. The town lights flickered across the water, distorted and fragile. Another mystery solved, another layer stripped away. But Evan knew the truth. Every answer only revealed how much more there was to face. Because silence, once learned, does not disappear. It waits. The past refuses to stay buried. As emotional truths begin to break. Harold Finch's arrest did not bring peace to Ashwood. It brought exposure. By sunrise, the news was everywhere. A senior law enforcement official in handcuffs. 15 years of silence reduced to grainy footage and half-remembered meetings. People didn't whisper anymore. They argued, loudly, publicly. Families split along invisible fault lines that had always existed but were never named. Evan watched it unfold from the station window, feeling the weight of every choice that had led here. Finch sat 2 rooms away in holding, silent now, stripped of the authority that had protected him for decades. But Evan knew better than to believe this was finished. Power never collapses cleanly. Mara entered his office with a tablet pressed against her chest. Her face was tight. Finch's lawyer is already spinning it, she said. Says he acted alone. Says Nora manipulated evidence. Says your father had nothing to do with it. Evan exhaled slowly. Of course he does. There's more, Mara continued. Internal Affairs just requested access to every case Finch ever touched. That's a lot. Evan nodded. Good. Let them see. Mara hesitated. And Evan, they're asking about you, about the 2009 search, about the meeting. I expected that, Evan said. I'll cooperate. She studied him. Even if it ends your career? Evan looked down at Sienna's letter on his desk. My career ended the night Lucas Reed was left alone, he said quietly. I just didn't admit it. That afternoon, April Reed returned to the station. She looked different now, straighter, calmer, like grief had hardened into purpose. They're talking about him on the news, she said, like he's a headline. Evan nodded. I'm sorry. April shook her head. No, I'm done with apologies. I want his name said correctly. I want the truth documented, every piece. You'll have it, Evan said, in court. April's eyes searched his. And after? Evan didn't answer right away. After, he said finally, we make sure this never happens again. April gave a small, tired smile. That's what everyone said before. Before Evan could respond, Nolan rushed in, breathless. Sienna's sister is here, he said. She says it's urgent. Evan felt his chest tighten. Minutes later, Claire Cole stood in the doorway, pale and shaking, clutching a manila envelope. I found this in Sienna's storage unit, she said. She told me to give it to you if anything ever happened. Evan took the envelope with unsteady hands. Inside were printed emails between Sienna and Harold Finch, dated years before Lucas's remains were found. Mara leaned closer, reading over Evan's shoulder. Sienna's words were calm, precise, afraid. You don't get to decide who disappears. I won't be quiet. If anything happens to me, these go public. Evan swallowed hard. She was fighting him, Mara whispered. Yes, Evan said. Alone. Claire's voice broke. She said loving you meant protecting you from yourself. I didn't understand that until now. Evan felt something give way inside him. All this time he had believed Sienna left because she couldn't live with his darkness. The truth was worse. She stayed longer than she should have. That night Evan sat alone in his house, the weight of memory pressing in from every corner. Finch's voice echoed in his mind, his father's, Lucas's. He poured a drink, then pushed it away untouched. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. You found him. Evan stared at the message. Then another appeared. But you haven't found the end. His heart pounded. Who are you? He typed. The reply came after a long pause. Someone who lived with the consequences long before you did. Evan's breath caught. Another message followed. Meet me where the first lie was told. Evan didn't need directions. The elementary school. It was closed now. Windows boarded, playground rusted and empty. He arrived, alone, just after midnight. The building loomed like a memory that refused to fade. Inside, a single classroom light was on. Evan stepped inside slowly. A woman stood at the front of the room, back to him. When she turned, his breath left him. Grace Holloway's daughter, Megan Holloway. I wondered when you'd come, she said softly. Evan's mind raced. You're the one who sent the message. Megan nodded. My mother died because of what you all did. She made her own choices, Evan said, then stopped himself. No, that's not true. She was cornered. Megan's eyes burned. Just like Lucas. Evan swallowed. Why now? Because Finch's arrest cracked the door, Megan said. And because Nora didn't finish what she started. Evan stiffened. You helped her. Megan smiled faintly. I watched, I documented, I waited. You let people die, Evan said. Megan stepped closer. So did you. Silence filled the room. Megan continued. This town was built on forgetting, on letting powerful people rewrite pain as procedure. Finch was only the most visible part. Evan's voice was steady but heavy. What do you want? The rest of the truth, Megan said. The part that never made it into files. She reached into her bag and pulled out a final envelope. This one was never meant for evidence, she said. It was meant for you. Evan took it. It was heavier than paper should be. Open it, Megan said, and then decide what kind of ending this town gets. Evan hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside was a confession, not Finch's, not Nora's, Walter Cole's. Evan's hands trembled as he read. We convinced ourselves we were protecting the town, but what we really protected was each other. And when the boy asked for help, I chose the silence I taught my son. Evan closed his eyes. The past hadn't just resurfaced. It had finally spoken clearly. And now, the final choice wasn't about justice. It was about whether Evan would repeat the lie or end it. Evan read his father's confession 3 times, not because he didn't understand it, because each time a different sentence hurt more than the last. He folded the letter carefully, as if neatness could undo what it contained, and looked up at Megan Holloway. The classroom felt smaller now, the air thick with chalk dust and memory. You kept this, Evan said. Megan nodded. My mother gave it to me years ago. She said if anything happened to her, I'd know what to do. And you waited. I watched, Megan corrected. I waited for the town to stop lying to itself. It never did. Evan exhaled slowly. People died while you waited. Megan's eyes flickered. People died because silence was rewarded. Evan didn't argue. He didn't have the right. Outside, the wind rattled loose metal on the playground. The sound echoed through the empty school like laughter that had nowhere to land. What happens now? Evan asked. Megan stepped back, creating distance. Now you decide whether the truth ends here or goes everywhere. She gestured toward the confession. If you release that, it doesn't just expose Finch or Nora. It exposes your father. It exposes you. Evan nodded. I know. And if you don't, Megan continued, this town learns nothing. It heals wrong. It forgets again. Evan folded the letter into his coat pocket. I won't bury it. Megan studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Good. She turned toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Evan waited. Finch wasn't alone, she said. Not in the beginning. There were others who learned how to keep their hands clean. Names, Evan said. Megan shook her head. Not yet. But the paper trail exists. Follow the money. Follow the promotions. Follow who benefited when cases went quiet. Evan felt the familiar weight settle in his chest again. You're not coming with me? Megan smiled faintly. I've done my part. By the time Evan returned to the station, dawn had broken. The town looked the same from the outside. Coffee shops opening, school buses idling, ordinary life stretching itself awake. Inside the station, it felt like a different place. Mara was already there, hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp despite the hour. You look like hell, she said. Evan handed her the letter. She read in silence. When she finished, she didn't look up right away. Your father signed this, she said finally. Yes. And you're going to release it? Yes, Mara nodded. Then we do it clean, recorded, documented, no room for spin. They set up the press room by mid-morning. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters murmured, sensing something final in the air. April Reed sat in the front row with Lily beside her. Claire Cole sat 2 seats away, hands folded, face unreadable. Evan stepped to the podium. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't stall. 15 years ago, he began, a child asked for help and was ignored. That failure didn't belong to one person. It belonged to a system that rewarded silence. He spoke about the meeting, about the threats, about Finch. Then he spoke about his father. The room went very quiet. This letter, Evan said, holding it up, was written by the man who taught me how to be a cop. It admits what we did wrong and why we did it. I am releasing it now because no truth deserves protection. A reporter shouted, Are you resigning? Evan met her gaze. Yes. A murmur rippled through the room. And I am submitting myself for investigation, he continued. Because accountability doesn't stop with the guilty, it stops with the honest. When he finished, the room erupted. Questions flew. Cameras flashed. But Evan felt something inside him loosen. Not relief. Release. Afterward, April approached him slowly. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, Evan replied. I did. April nodded. Then I'll testify. Against all of them. Lily squeezed her hand. Mara watched from the doorway, pride and worry warring in her expression. That afternoon, internal affairs took over the station. Files were boxed, computers cloned, names logged. Evan handed in his badge. The metal felt heavier than he expected. Mara stood with him outside as the sun dipped low. What will you do now? She asked. Evan looked toward the river, visible in the distance, moving steadily, indifferent and enduring. "I'll keep telling the truth," he said, "even when it costs me." Mara nodded. That might be the hardest job there is. As Evan walked away from the station for the last time, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You chose right," Evan typed back. "Is it over?" The reply took longer. "For the town, maybe. For you, it's just beginning." Evan slipped the phone into his pocket and kept walking. Behind him, Ashwood buzzed with consequence. Ahead of him, the past finally lay in the open. Not buried, not quiet, waiting to be faced. What everyone believed was wrong about the crime. Ashwood did not collapse after the truth came out. It fractured. The town split along invisible lines that had always existed but were never acknowledged. Some people clung to the past, defending old decisions with tired phrases about context and different times. Others demanded names, charges, and consequences that went far beyond Harold Finch. Evan watched it from a distance now, without a badge, without authority, without the illusion of control. He rented a small room above a closed bookstore on the edge of town. The owner didn't ask questions. In Ashwood, people were learning when silence was still useful and when it was dangerous. On his second night there, Evan woke from a dream where the mail depot walls were closing in, letters crawling across the concrete like insects. He sat up, gasping, sweat cold on his neck, and knew something wasn't finished. The town wasn't done lying. It was just lying differently. Mara found him the next morning. She didn't knock. She never did. "You need to see this," she said, holding up a tablet. Evan rubbed his face. "I don't work for the department anymore." "Good," Mara replied, "because this isn't official." She set the tablet down between them. It showed a scanned document. A coroner's report. Date, 2010. Name, Lucas Reed. Cause of death, undetermined. Burial location, unknown. Evan's chest tightened. "That report was never released," Mara nodded. "Because it was replaced." She swiped. A second report appeared. Same name, different date. Cause of death, drowning. Location, river accident, ruled accidental. Evan stared. "That never happened." "No," Mara said quietly. "But it was filed, signed, entered into the system." Evan's mind raced. "So the town didn't just bury him. They rewrote him." Mara leaned back. "And that's not the worst part." She pulled up a third document, a sealed settlement agreement between the town of Ashwood and a private contractor, dated months after Lucas disappeared. Amount, confidential. Purpose, infrastructure remediation near riverbank. Evan felt sick. "They paid to pour concrete," he said. Mara nodded. "Over the site where his remains were later found." Silence settled between them. Then Evan asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Who authorized it?" Mara met his eyes. "Your father's signature is on the recommendation. Finch approved the execution." Evan closed his eyes. Everything everyone believed about the crime was wrong. It wasn't a moment of panic, it was a process. That afternoon, Evan went to see April. She sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out like a war map. Legal documents, advocacy forms, names circled in red. "I'm not letting them settle this quietly," she said, without looking up. Evan nodded. "They'll try." "They already are," April said. "People are calling me, offering help, offering money." Evan's jaw tightened. "To stay quiet." April laughed once. "I stayed quiet for 15 years. It didn't save my son." She slid a folder toward him. "Do you know who this is?" she asked. Evan glanced at the photo clipped inside. A young man, late 20s, dark hair, familiar eyes. "No," Evan said slowly. "That's Eli Reed," April said. "Lucas's cousin, my sister's boy." Evan looked up. He never came up in the case. He was sent away, April said. Boarding school, therapy, anywhere but here. She tapped the photo. He came back 3 years ago. Evan's pulse quickened. And he works in construction, April said quietly. Municipal contracts, infrastructure projects. Evan felt the room tilt. He helped pour the concrete, he said. April nodded. But he didn't know what was underneath, she continued. Not at first, Evan leaned forward. When did he find out? April swallowed. Last year, when he found old invoices, when he recognized names. Evan's thoughts snapped into place. Nora didn't start this, he said. She wasn't even the end. April's voice was steady now. Eli didn't want revenge. He wanted truth, but truth takes time and silence fights back. Evan felt a cold understanding settle in. All the letters, he said. The years, the patience. April nodded. He learned it from watching us survive without answers. That night, Evan walked alone to the riverbank. The concrete slab was still there, cracked now, weeds pushing through. A memorial had been placed nearby, candles flickering in the dark. He knelt and pressed his hand against the cold surface. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Behind him, a voice spoke. "You weren't supposed to hear that." Evan turned. A man stood a few feet away, hands visible, posture careful. Eli Reed looked older than his photo. Tired, not dangerous. "April told you," Evan said. Eli nodded. "I figured she would." "You orchestrated the letters," Evan said. "Some of them," Eli replied. "The early ones. Nora joined later." Evan exhaled. "People died." Eli's jaw tightened. "People were dying long before I wrote a single word." They stood in silence, the river murmuring beside them. "I didn't kill Rachel," Eli said quietly. "I warned her." "And Grace?" Evan asked. "She was already broken," Eli said. "I gave her the truth. She couldn't live with it." Evan studied him. "And Finch?" Eli's eyes hardened. "That one was for Lucas." Evan said nothing. Eli continued. "You want to arrest me?" "I want to understand," Evan replied, "before this destroys what's left." Eli nodded. "Everything everyone believed about this town was wrong. It wasn't built on community. It was built on erasing inconvenience." Evan felt the truth of that in his bones. "What happens now?" Evan asked. Eli looked toward the water. "Now the town decides if it wants justice or another lie." Sirens sounded in the distance. Mara's voice echoed faintly through a radio. Eli stepped back. "I won't run," he said. "I'm tired." Evan nodded, because sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't a murderer. It was a truth that refused to disappear, and Ashwood was finally being forced to look at itself without blinking. The unopened letter reveals the truth behind every lie. Eli Reed didn't resist when the officers arrived. He stood beside the river with his hands loose at his sides, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the water that had swallowed 15 years of truth. When Mara approached, weapon lowered but ready, he looked at her and nodded once, as if confirming a decision already made. "It's okay," he said. "I'm done running." Evan watched, silently as the cuffs went on. Not with relief, with something closer to mourning. Because Eli Reed didn't look like a monster. He looked like a consequence. At the station, Eli asked for no lawyer. "I'll talk," he said calmly. "Not because I want mercy, because I want accuracy." They put him in interview room B, the same room Evan had used for years, the same chair where he'd once promised a scared mother that they were doing everything possible. Evan sat across from Eli now. No badge, no authority. Just two men facing the damage left behind by silence. "I didn't start with letters," Eli began. "I started with records." Evan nodded. The invoices. Yes, concrete contracts, emergency approvals, names that repeated too often to be coincidence. Eli leaned back. At first, I thought it was corruption, money, favor trading, that kind of rot. And then? Evan asked. And then I found Lucas's name crossed out of a coroner's ledger. Eli said quietly. Written over, replaced. Evan closed his eyes. That's when I stopped believing in accidents. Eli explained how he'd gone back through town archives, how he'd watched patterns form, people who spoke up disappeared, people who stayed silent advanced. Letters, he said, were never about threats at first. They were reminders, a way to wake sleeping guilt. I sent the earliest ones years ago, Eli said. No pressure, no demands, just facts they had buried. And when people died, Evan asked. Eli's jaw tightened. Some people couldn't live with what they remembered. Some tried to fix it too late. Evan thought of Grace Holloway, Rachel Miller. People who had finally looked at the truth and found it unbearable. You knew Finch would step in, Evan said. Eli nodded. Men like him always do. They think control equals protection. And Nora? Evan asked. She wanted accountability, Eli said. I wanted exposure. We weren't aligned, but our paths crossed. Evan leaned forward. You used Lily. Eli flinched. I protected her. You traumatized her. Eli looked down. I showed her that silence hurts children, that adults lie. Evan stood abruptly. That wasn't your right. Eli met his gaze. Neither was burying my cousin under concrete. Silence filled the room. When the interview ended, Eli signed a full confession. Every letter, every name, every step. No omissions, no conditions. He didn't ask for leniency. He didn't ask for forgiveness. The town erupted when the news broke. Not just about Finch, not just about Nora, but about the system, about the payments, about the falsified death certificates, about the concrete poured deliberately over evidence. Ashwood's image cracked beyond repair. A federal task force arrived. Files were seized, accounts frozen, former officials called back from retirement. Some fled, some denied, some finally spoke. April Reed testified for 6 hours. She didn't cry once. She used Lucas's full name every time. Sienna Cole's emails were released next. They showed years of quiet resistance, warnings ignored, threats deflected, truth delayed. Evan read them alone in his room above the bookstore, realizing how wrong he'd been about the woman he loved. She hadn't left because she couldn't handle the darkness. She had stayed because she was braver than he was. 1 week later, the final unopened letter was entered into evidence. The first one. The one found beside Rachel's body. The one that started everything. In court, the judge ordered it opened publicly. Cameras rolled. Reporters leaned forward. The seal broke with a soft sound that echoed louder than gunfire. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, careful. It read, "If you are reading this, it means you waited too long." This letter was never meant to stop a crime. It was meant to stop a lie. Lucas Reed asked for help. You heard him. You chose yourselves. There is no justice without memory. There is no healing without truth. Do not close this again. The courtroom was silent. No gasps, no whispers. Just the weight of 15 years settling into public record. Harold Finch was sentenced first. Multiple counts. Decades. No parole. He stared straight ahead as the verdict was read, the expression of a man who still believed he'd done the right thing. Nora Klein accepted her sentence without protest. She apologized to April, to Lily, not to the court. Eli Reed pleaded guilty. He asked to speak once before sentencing. I didn't want blood, he said. I wanted honesty. If I caused pain trying to expose pain, then let that be counted. The judge listened. The sentence was heavy but not vengeful. Evan attended every hearing, not as an officer, as a witness, as a man whose name would always be tied to the case. When it was over, Ashwood was quieter than it had ever been. Not the comfortable silence of before, but the careful silence of a place learning how to speak honestly. Evan walked to the river one last time. The concrete slab had been removed, the soil beneath it exposed. A small marker stood where Lucas had been buried. Just his name, just his age, nothing else. April stood nearby with Lily. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Evan stepped back, letting them have the space. As he turned away, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One last message. Some letters should never be opened. Evan typed back. Some should. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. No reply. Evan slipped the phone into his pocket and walked on. Behind him, the river moved steadily. In front of him, the future waited. Uncomfortable, uncertain, but finally honest. Because the letter had been opened, and the lie could never be sealed again. Evan didn't expect the quiet to feel so violent. After the courtroom emptied and the cameras moved on to the next headline, Ashwood was left alone with itself. No soundtrack, no sirens, no urgent footsteps. Just ordinary sounds. A dog barking 2 streets over, a car door closing, the soft groan of wind against old trees. It should have felt like an ending. It didn't. It felt like a town holding a bruise and pretending it wasn't there. Evan walked down Main Street late one evening, hands in his pockets, avoiding storefront windows the way people avoided mirrors when they didn't like what they might see. He wasn't sheriff anymore. He wasn't even sure what he was, besides a man who had watched his own history be rewritten in public. People recognized him anyway. Some looked away. Some stared too long. A few nodded, tight and cautious, as if acknowledging him might invite the past to follow them home. He didn't blame any of them. He had lived off avoidance for years. Now he could see it everywhere. Mara found him outside the closed bookstore, leaning on the rail and watching traffic roll past like it belonged to a different world. "You're late," she said. Evan glanced at her. "You still keeping time on me?" Mara's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Some habits are hard to kill. They stood there for a moment, comfortable in a silence that didn't feel like hiding. Then Mara handed him a thin file. "Federal team finished combing through Finch's archives," she said. "They found something they didn't know what to do with." Evan took the file. "Why are you giving it to me?" Mara held his gaze. "Because they think you're done." "I don't." Evan didn't argue. He opened the file. Inside was a photocopy of an old report, yellowed edges, typed paragraphs. One line circled in red. "Secondary containment protocol initiated under Directive HC." Evan's stomach tightened. HC, not Harold Finch, not Walter Cole, different initials. Mara watched his expression. "You see it?" Evan nodded slowly. "This means Finch wasn't the top." Mara's voice dropped. "It means someone trained him. Someone who wrote the playbook." Evan stared at the circled initials until his eyes burned. "Who the hell is HC?" he asked. Mara exhaled. "That's what I came to tell you. The federal team traced it to one name that kept slipping through records. A consultant. Never formally employed, always advising." Evan felt the air change around him. "Name," he said. Mara hesitated, then spoke. "Howard Carrick." Evan didn't recognize it, which made it worse, because the people who mattered most in Ashwood's hidden history were the ones no one talked about. They drove in silence to the old records building, now under federal seal, quiet as a cemetery. Mara had keys, connections, the kind of access Evan no longer possessed. He followed anyway, not because he had authority, but because he had something heavier now. Responsibility. Inside, the air smelled of paper and dust and the faint metallic sting of old filing cabinets. Mara led him to a locked drawer marked Consulting. Contracts. Look, she said. Evan pulled out a folder and flipped through. Invoices, payment schedules, all routed through third parties. One recurring line item caught his eye. Community Risk Communications, H. Carrick. His throat tightened. This is the language my father used. Mara nodded. Exactly. Evan's mind raced. So Carrick taught my father. Or partnered with him, Mara said softly. Evan felt the walls closing in. Not physically, morally. Like every time he thought they'd reached the end of the rot, it extended deeper. Mara slid another file toward him. A personnel note. Howard Carrick, former public relations crisis strategist, hired by small municipalities facing reputation-threatening incidents. Evan read the next line and felt his blood cool. Specialty, narrative containment. Mara's voice was flat. He didn't just help cover up Lucas, he designed the cover-up. Evan swallowed. Where is he now? Mara shook, her head. Retired, but not gone. The next day, Evan visited April. She sat on her porch with Lily beside her, both wrapped in sweaters against the cold. The candles at Lucas's memorial had burned down to stubs. Flowers wilted and replaced. Grief had become routine. April didn't stand when she saw Evan. She didn't smile either. She just said, "Tell me you're not done." Evan sat on the step below her. "I'm not." April's eyes narrowed. "Then don't bring me theory, bring me names." Evan handed her the file with Carrick's name. April read it slowly. When she looked up, her face had changed. Not shocked, recognizing. "I've heard that name," she said. Evan's pulse jumped. "Where?" April stared toward the street as if seeing years ago through the present. "The week after Lucas disappeared," she said quietly. "A woman came to my house. Not Finch. Not my caseworker. Someone else." Evan leaned forward. "What did she say?" April's jaw clenched. "She said there were people helping the town manage the situation. She told me my grief was understandable, but public hysteria wasn't helpful. And then she told me my neighbors were tired." Evan's stomach turned. April's voice sharpened. "She said if I kept shouting, the town would turn against me, and she'd make sure it happened." Mara's eyes widened. "You never mentioned that." April laughed without humor. "I didn't even know her name, but now I do." Evan felt something cold settle into place. Carrick wasn't just a consultant, he was a weapon. A quiet one. The kind that didn't leave fingerprints. That night, Evan received an email from an unfamiliar address. No subject line, just a single attachment. A scanned letter. He opened it slowly, feeling his pulse in his throat. The handwriting was neat, old-fashioned, confident. At the top, Howard Carrick. Private advisory below, a sentence underlined twice. Containment requires an example. Evan's skin prickled. The letter continued. It described Ashwood as a manageable community, Lucas Reed as a destabilizing factor, and public grief as contagious. At the bottom, 2 signatures appeared. Walter Cole, Howard Carrick. Evan stared until the words blurred. Mara read over his shoulder, then whispered, "Your father didn't invent it. He adopted it." Evan felt sick. "And he taught it to Finch." Mara nodded. "And Finch used it until it killed." Evan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. A short message appeared. "Still digging, Evan?" Mara's eyes snapped to him. "That's not Eli." Evan's throat tightened. "No." The message continued. "You should have let the story end clean," Evan typed back. "Who is this?" A pause. Then, "Someone who knows how to close a chapter." Evan's breath caught. Mara grabbed her own phone. "I'm tracing it." Evan stared at the screen. The fear he'd felt earlier in the case, the sense of being watched, returned with a different shape now. This wasn't revenge. This was control. The original kind, the kind that had buried a child under concrete and called it stability. Evan and Mara drove to the address tied to Carrick's last known contract, a quiet office suite in Portland now listed as vacant. Inside, the space was stripped clean, no furniture, no files, no trace of life. But on the wall, taped neatly, was a single envelope, unopened. Evan's name. Mara stared. "He's taunting you." Evan didn't touch it at first. He just looked at it, feeling the old dread return. Letters had started everything. Letters had ended everything, and somehow letters were still alive. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple card. One sentence. "If you want to protect Lily Reed, stop reopening what I closed." Evan's blood ran cold. Mara's eyes widened. "He threatened Lily." Evan's hands shook. "He's still playing." Mara's voice was sharp. "We need to get April and Lily into protective custody." Evan nodded. "Now." April resisted at first. "I'm not running again," she snapped when Evan told her. "This isn't running," Evan said. "This is surviving." April looked at Lily, and for the first time since Lucas's remains were found, fear broke through her hard shell. "Fine," she whispered. "But if anything happens to her?" Evan met her gaze. "It won't." He wanted to believe it. He had to. That night, Lily slept in a secure room at the station guarded by officers Mara trusted. April sat beside her, eyes open, refusing to rest. Evan sat in the hallway, back against the wall, listening to the steady rhythm of Lily's breathing through the door. Mara sat beside him. "You think Carrick is still in town?" she asked. "I think he never left," Evan replied. "He just moved where we couldn't see him." Mara exhaled. "And he wants the story closed." Evan stared at the floor. "He thinks truth is something you can file away." Mara's voice softened. "And you're going to prove him wrong." Evan didn't respond, because proving him wrong might cost another life, and Evan wasn't sure how many more payments the town could afford. Not in money, in blood. At dawn, Evan's phone buzzed again. Unknown number, a final message for the night. The last lie wasn't Lucas, it was what you thought you knew about your own family. Evan felt his stomach drop. He typed back. "What does that mean?" No response, just silence. But this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt loaded, like a gun held behind a smile. And Evan understood something terrifying. The letter that had been opened in court had ended one story. But another story, older, quieter, more poisonous, was still unfolding. And it wasn't finished with him yet. A shocking final revelation that changes everything forever. Evan didn't move for a long time after the last message. He sat in the hallway, outside the secure room where Lily slept, listening to the station's quiet hum. The building felt like it was holding its breath. Even the fluorescent lights seemed softer, as if the world itself didn't want to make noise. The last lie wasn't Lucas. It was what you thought you knew about your own family. Evan read it again, then again. Each time, the sentence felt less like a threat and more like an invitation to collapse. Mara noticed the change in his face. "What?" she asked. Evan handed her the phone. Mara read it once, then looked up. "This is Carrick." Evan nodded slowly. "He's not just trying to scare me, he's trying to steer me." Mara's eyes hardened. "Then we don't follow his road, we build our own." Evan stared at the floor. "What if my father's confession was incomplete?" Mara didn't answer right away. Then she said carefully, "What if the confession was the version your father wanted the world to hear?" Evan felt his chest tighten, because that sounded like Walter Cole, Even in guilt, Walter would have managed the narrative. Even in remorse, he would have tried to contain damage. Mara stood. Come on. Evan blinked. Where? Mara's voice was firm. To the one place where your father kept the things he didn't want anyone else touching. Evan hesitated. My dad's shed? Mara nodded. Unless you've got another secret vault in mind. Evan's mouth went dry. He hadn't been there since the funeral. He'd kept the key out of habit, like a piece of metal could lock away pain. Now the key felt heavier in his pocket, like it knew why it still existed. The shed sat behind Walter Cole's old house, tucked between a leaning fence and a row of fir trees. The property had been empty since Walter died, quiet, untouched, preserved like a museum of avoidance. Mara's flashlight cut through the darkness as Evan unlocked the door. The air inside smelled of oil, dust, and old paper. Tools lined the yachatodio walls, boxes stacked in corners. And along the back, a metal filing cabinet Evan didn't remember. Mara crouched beside it. Locked! Evan took out the key ring he'd carried for years and tried them one by one. The last key turned. The drawer slid open with a slow metallic groan. Evan froze. Inside were folders, not police reports, not case files. Personal files. The kind people keep when they're afraid of being seen. Mara reached for the top folder and read the label aloud. Howard Carrick. Evan's stomach dropped. Mara flipped it open. Emails, signed agreements, notes in Walter Cole's handwriting. And a single photograph clipped to the inside cover. A young Evan, maybe 5 years old, sitting on a porch step. Behind him, 2 men stood, Walter Cole, and a stranger with calm eyes and a confident posture, Howard Carrick. Evan's throat tightened. Mara stared at the photo. You knew him? Evan's voice came out rough. No. He took the photo with shaking hands, studying it like it might change if he blinked. Carrick's hand rested on Walter's shoulder in a way that wasn't casual. It was familiar, possessive. Mara slid another paper out of the folder. A birth certificate, Evan's name, his mother's name, and in the father section. Evan's breath caught. It didn't say Walter Cole, it said Howard Carrick. Evan's knees went weak. He grabbed the cabinet for balance. No, he whispered. Mara's face tightened. Evan. He couldn't hear her. All he could hear was the echo of every memory he had ever mislabeled. His father's distance, his father's control, his father's obsession with protecting the town. It hadn't been just a principle. It had been a shared method, a shared secret, a shared man. Evan swallowed hard, forcing breath into his lungs. My dad wasn't my dad, he said. Mara stepped closer, voice low. Walter raised you. Evan shook his head sharply. Walter managed me. Mara didn't argue, because the file in Evan's hands was proof. Proof that the story of his life had been edited, just like Lucas's, just like Ashwood's. Evan's phone buzzed. A call, unknown number. Mara's eyes snapped up. Don't, Evan answered anyway. Hello? A pause. Then a voice, smooth as polished stone. Evan. Evan's blood went cold. You found the cabinet, Carrick said. Mara mouthed, put it on speaker. Evan pressed the button. Carrick's voice filled the shed. You were always persistent, Carrick continued. That trait is hereditary. Evan clenched his jaw. You're my father. Carrick chuckled softly, like Evan had finally solved a simple puzzle. Biologically, yes. Mara's face turned hard. Where are you, Carrick? Carrick ignored her. Walter didn't want you to know. He thought it would complicate your identity. Evan's voice shook with restrained rage. You hid behind him. Carrick sighed. I protected you. I gave you a good name, a stable home, a story that made sense. Evan's hands trembled. You call that protection? Carrick's tone stayed calm. I call it containment. Evan closed his eyes. Containment. The same word in the files, the same sickness dressed up as responsibility. Mara spoke, cold and precise. You threatened Lily Reed. Carrick chuckled. I warned Sheriff Cole. There's a difference. Evan snapped. Don't call me sheriff. Carrick paused. You're right. You resigned. A noble performance. Evan's teeth clenched. Why are you doing this? Why now? Carrick's voice softened, almost parental. Because you're breaking something that was designed to hold. Evan stared at the birth certificate. You built this, he whispered. You built the cover-up. Carrick didn't deny it. He said, I helped a community survive an incident that could have destroyed it. Mara's eyes burned. You buried a child. Carrick's voice cooled. A tragedy occurred. Tragedies happen. What matters is whether a town can continue functioning. Evan felt bile rise in his throat. So Lucas was just... What? Evan demanded. A liability to? Carrick's tone was almost bored. Lucas was a spark in dry grass. Evan's fist clenched. And I'm what? Carrick paused, then softly. You're the last line that matters. Mara whispered, he's here, or close. Evan's phone buzzed again. Another message came in mid-call. A photo, April Reed's porch, a shadow near the railing. Evan's heart slammed. April! Mara moved instantly. Go! Evan ended the call without a word. Carrick's laughter echoed faintly as the line cut. They tore through town in Mara's car, tires hissing on wet pavement. Evan's mind raced through possibilities. If Carrick was close enough to watch April's house, he was close enough to act. And if he had threatened Lily, it meant the worst lesson hadn't ended with Lucas. It was repeating. Evan's phone rang again. April this time. Evan answered, breathless. April, her voice came out tight and shaking. Someone was here. Evan's stomach dropped. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, but there was an envelope on my kitchen table. I didn't hear the door. I didn't hear anything. It was just there. Evan's throat tightened. Don't open it. April's laugh was sharp and exhausted. I'm done following instructions from men who hide behind paper. Evan swallowed hard. Read it to me. Don't touch anything else. April hesitated. Okay. He heard the soft crackle of paper on the line. Then April read, voice breaking with anger. You want justice. Justice has rules. Truth doesn't. If you testify again, your daughter will spend her life paying for your courage. Evan gripped the phone. April, lock your doors. Stay inside. I'm coming. April's breath shook. Who is doing this? Evan looked at Mara. Mara's jaw was tight as steel. Evan said quietly into the phone, the man who taught this town how to lie. When they reached April's house, patrol cars were already there. Mara had called ahead. Officers had secured the perimeter. April stood on her porch, pale but upright, refusing to be moved. Lily clung to her side, eyes wide. Evan approached slowly. Are you hurt? April shook her head. No. Evan looked at Lily. Hey. Lily didn't respond. She stared at Evan like he was a story she didn't trust anymore. Mara scanned the yard, flashlight cutting through bushes and shadows. He was here recently, she murmured. No tracks in the wet grass. That means he stayed on pavement. Evan's gaze snapped to the sidewalk. A faint scuff mark. A cigarette butt. Evan's stomach turned. April's voice was low. What did you find? Evan didn't answer. Because he didn't want to put Carrick's presence into the air like it was normal. Mara turned toward the street. Evan. Evan followed her gaze. A car sat at the curb, engine idling, headlights off. A shape inside, watching. Evan's blood ran cold. Mara raised her weapon. "Police! Show your hands!" The car door opened slowly. A man stepped out. Older than the voice suggested, gray hair, expensive coat, calm eyes. Howard Carrick lifted his hands, smiling like a man greeting neighbors. "Deputy Lewis," he said warmly. "How lovely to finally meet you." Mara's jaw tightened. "On your knees," Carrick's smile held. "Is that necessary?" Evan stepped forward. "It ends now." Carrick's gaze slid to Evan, almost tender. "You look like your mother." Evan flinched. Carrick continued, voice low enough that it felt intimate. "Walter never understood you. He wanted to shape you into a tool. I wanted you to be an heir." Evan's throat tightened. "You don't get to claim me." Carrick sighed, as if disappointed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Mara barked, "On your knees, Carrick." Carrick looked at April, then at Lily. Something cold passed behind his eyes. And then, without warning, Carrick bolted. Mara fired a warning shot into the dirt. Officers surged forward. Carrick ran toward the tree line. Evan ran after him. Not because he wanted heroism, because he couldn't let another child become a footnote. They crashed through wet leaves and branches, breath tearing in cold air. Carrick moved surprisingly fast for his age. He knew the town. He knew how to vanish in it. Evan gained on him near the riverbank. The same river. Always the same river. Carrick stumbled on slick mud and turned, breath steady, eyes bright. "You see?" he said, almost amused. "It always comes back here." Evan's voice shook with rage and grief. "Why did you do it?" Carrick's smile faded. "Because people are animals in groups. They need stories to survive. I gave them one." "You destroyed lives," Evan spat. Carrick's eyes hardened. "I protected a community." "And my family?" Evan said. "My mother? Walter? Sienna?" Carrick's voice lowered. "Sienna was inconvenient." Evan froze. Carrick tilted his head. "She thought she could shame me with emails, threaten me with exposure. Walter tried to handle it quietly. He failed." Evan's stomach turned. "You killed her?" Carrick didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just said softly, "Inconvenient truths often find inconvenient endings." Evan lunged. They collided in the mud near the water's edge. Carrick fought like a man who had spent his life avoiding consequences, quick, desperate, furious when cornered. Mara's voice shouted somewhere behind them. Officers closed in. Evan pinned Carrick hard, forearm across his chest. Carrick stared up at him, breathing fast now, control finally slipping. "This town will eat you alive," Carrick rasped. "They'll need you to be the villain so they can believe they're innocent." Evan's voice broke. "Let them." Carrick's eyes narrowed. "You think you're different? You're made of the same silence." Evan pressed him down harder. "Not anymore." Mara arrived, cuffs in hand, face fierce and shaken. "You're done," she snapped, locking Carrick's wrists. Carrick didn't struggle. He just looked at Evan and smiled with something like pity. "You opened the wrong letter," he whispered. "Now you'll never close the door again." Evan stood, breathing hard, mud on his hands, river noise roaring in his ears. Maybe Carrick was right about one thing. Doors don't close after truth. But Evan didn't want them to. Not anymore. Because if Ashwood ever tried to bury a child again, Evan wanted the town to remember the sound it made when the concrete finally cracked. Carrick's arrest didn't feel like victory. It felt like the moment after a storm passes, when the sky clears but everything on the ground is broken, soaked, and changed forever. Evan stood by the river as officers pulled Howard Carrick to his feet. Mud clung to Carrick's coat. His calm was gone now, replaced by something tight and calculating, as if he were already planning how history might still bend in his favor. "You can't arrest an idea," Carrick said quietly as they led him away. Towns survive on forgetting. Evan didn't respond, because Carrick was wrong. Towns don't survive on forgetting. They survive on accountability, or they rot. Ashwood unraveled fast after that. Federal indictments followed within days. Old contracts were reopened, settlements voided. Names once spoken with respect were now spoken with disbelief and shame. People learned that the crime wasn't just what happened to Lucas Reed, but what had been done after. The meetings, the paperwork, the decisions disguised as meta responsibility. The town learned it had been managed, not protected. April Reed testified again. This time, she wasn't alone. Lily sat beside her, small but steady, holding her mother's hand as April spoke Lucas's name into the record again and again. Not as a victim, not as a mistake, as a child who mattered. Evan watched from the back of the courtroom. He didn't flinch when his father's name was spoken. He didn't look away when Sienna's emails were read aloud. He didn't lower his head when his own failures were described, because hiding was the disease. Howard Carrick's trial never reached a jury. The evidence was too extensive, the paper trail too precise, the recordings too clean. He pled guilty to obstruction, coercion, conspiracy, and indirect homicide through negligent concealment. The language was legal and bloodless, but the meaning was clear. He had taught Ashwood how to erase people. When the judge asked if he wished to make a statement, Carrick looked directly at Evan. "I gave people what they asked for," he said. "Comfort, continuity, silence." The judge replied coldly, "You gave them a lie." Carrick was sentenced to life. No press conference followed, no dramatic headlines. Just a quiet acknowledgement that something poisonous had finally been named. Weeks later, the concrete slab by the river was gone. In its place stood a small open space bordered by young trees planted by volunteers who said nothing while they worked. At the center was a simple plaque. Lucas Reed, age 9. He was heard too late. Evan stood there one evening as the sun dipped low. April and Lily joined him. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Mara found Evan later that night sitting on the steps of the closed bookstore. "They offered you a position," she said casually. "Federal Review Board, oversight, policy, reform." Evan smiled faintly. "Let me guess. They want someone who understands how systems fail." Mara nodded. "And how silence spreads." Evan looked out at the street. "I'll take it, on one condition." Mara raised an eyebrow. "That my name never outranks the truth." Mara smiled. "You've changed." Evan shook his head. "No. I finally stopped being edited." That night, Evan returned to his small room and opened the last box he'd avoided since the trial. Inside were his father's belongings, photographs, old notes, and one final envelope, unopened. Evan stared at it for a long time. Then he opened it. Inside was a single line written in Walter Cole's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you chose differently than I did." Evan folded the paper carefully. Not with anger, not with forgiveness, with understanding. Ashwood would never be the same. And that was the idea point. Because the most dangerous crimes aren't the ones committed in darkness. They're the ones hidden in daylight, justified, normalized, sealed inside envelopes no one dares to open until someone finally does and listens. Epilogue. What remains after the truth? Ashwood didn't heal quickly. That was the lie people expected, a clean ending, a moral arc, a town redeemed by exposure. But real places don't work like stories people tell themselves at night. They change slowly, painfully. in uneven pieces. Some storefronts closed for good. Some families moved away without saying goodbye. Others stayed and learned how to live in a place that no longer pretended innocence was automatic. Evan returned often, but he never moved back. He kept the room above the bookstore for a while, then traded it for a small apartment in Portland when the work with the Federal Review Board began. Oversight, audits, training programs that taught departments how to recognize the early signs of narrative containment before it metastasized into policy. It wasn't glamorous. That mattered. He sat in rooms with people who looked like his father once had, confident, certain, tired of hearing about consequences. Evan spoke carefully, not to accuse, to explain how easily silence learned to wear a badge. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. He kept going anyway. April Reed never left Ashwood. She took over a small nonprofit office near the courthouse, one that helped families navigate cold cases and institutional stonewalling. She didn't raise her voice in meetings. She didn't need to. People listened because they could feel the weight behind her words. Lily grew quieter for a time, then stronger. She drew pictures that weren't just dark anymore. Trees, rivers, faces without mouths, then faces with them. April never rushed her. Healing didn't care about deadlines. On the anniversary of Lucas's death, Lily placed a letter at the memorial by the river. It wasn't sealed. That mattered too. Mara stayed. Someone had to. She became chief 2 years later, not because she wanted the power, but because she understood how easily it corrupted when left unattended. Her office door stayed open. Files stayed accessible. Decisions were documented like they mattered, because they did. Every so often she called Evan late at night, not about work, about the quiet, about how it still felt strange to hear the river without flinching. Howard Carrick faded the way men like him always did. Not with regret, with resentment. He wrote letters from prison that were never sent, appeals that went nowhere, essays about order and decay that no one published. The system he believed in no longer needed him. That was his real sentence. Years later, Evan stood in a different town at a different river, listening to a community meeting where someone asked if it was really worth reopening an old case. Evan waited. Then he spoke. He told them about a boy who asked for help, about a town that chose comfort over courage, about how the damage didn't stop with one grave. And when he finished, the room was quiet, not the old, dangerous kind, the kind that meant people were thinking. That night, Evan returned home and found an envelope slid under his door. No name, no return address. He stared at it for a long moment, feeling the old reflex tug at him. Then he smiled faintly and opened it. Inside was a thank you note from a mother in another town, from someone who had decided not to wait. Evan folded the paper and placed it on his desk. Some letters don't warn, some don't threaten, some don't expose lies. Some exist to remind you that opening the truth, no matter how late, still matters, and that once you learn to read honestly, you never go back to sealed envelopes again. Some crimes don't end with arrests, they end with remembering. Tonight's story wasn't just about what happened, it was about what was ignored. The unopened letter wasn't the danger. The silence was. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think, or made you uncomfortable, then Dark Pulse did its job. Because the darkest stories aren't always loud. Sometimes they whisper. If you want more real-feeling crime stories, deep psychological thrillers, and mysteries that don't let go, subscribe to Dark Pulse. New stories, new secrets every time. Until next time, keep your doors locked and your truth closer.